clearly than me doing it. So you are welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Just before I introduce myself, allow me to introduce my colleague from the Ministry of Finance, Mr. John Omutuju. He's an economist in the Debt Policy and Issuance Department. My name is Joy Gessa. I'm also from the Ministry of Finance, also from the Debt Policy and Issuance Department. We are honored to be here to speak to you this morning about debt in the EAC region and how the challenges are being addressed. I hope that we will have fruitful discussions and we will be able to take this forward and to learn something today. I don't know whether I should start right away or I should wait for you. Sorry, we thought we were going to have a panel discussion, so we don't have a presentation for you, but we have a write-up. You can still follow it along the way. I don't know whether I should start or wait. A minute. So we were asked to discuss the outlook of debt sustainability in the East African community and how EAC member states are tackling this issue of debt. Of course, there is a growing concern over the region and globally of the rising levels of debt, on the entire globe. And we know that, countries have experienced high levels of debt. I can't move it. Okay. Or should I sit there and okay. So I think the introduction is on the first page. Help me move it. So as a way of introduction, we were saying that countries have experienced rising levels of debt everywhere globally. The EAC member states are not unique, okay? So we know that over the past few years, debt has grown as a result of, especially in the last 5 years for Uganda, if you think about it, because of low growth as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. That is the time that we saw ourselves beginning to increase the levels of commercial borrowing. But when you think about debt, if you begin the discussion on debt, there must be something. Today I'm not going to ask that question, why we borrow, but there's a misconception that we borrow because we have needs, because we have to do infrastructure investments, because we have to spend on social projects and the like. But that's not why we borrow. We borrow because we have a deficit. So if you're going to talk about debt, you must have a deficit. And what that means is that the difference between your revenues and there's a difference between your income and your expenditure. And if your expenditure is less than your income, definitely you are going to have to borrow. And that is where the discussion starts on the growth of debt. Another point that I want us to note, we are so worried about the level of debt. We are so worried about debt GDP. We are so worried about debt service, but we forget the discussion on utilization. So for us to have a balanced argument, a discussion about debt, we need to understand that we don't just borrow out of the blue. So we have seen in the past, we have some statistics. There's an annex. John, is the annex here? The last page. There's an annex that we have on the debt sustainability outlook in the East African community. We see that as a June 2024, debt to GDP of Uganda was at 46.9%. And Uganda is, described as being at a moderate rate of debt distress. That means that once you experience a certain shock, to some extent you may not be able to pay your debt. Once we get another global pandemic, in case it happens, or once the wars continue escalating and we are seeing commodity prices going down, we have seen in the newspapers people starting to rob and to fight over coffee, and we know that coffee is a major export of this country. Once we begin to dwindle in those areas, we may find ourselves at a high level of debt distress, and what that means is that we have a lot of difficulty in paying our debt. When it comes to Kenya's debt to GDP stands at 65.7%, and Kenya is facing a high level of debt distress. They are having very big issues, difficulty in paying debt. When you think about Tanzania, they are at 35.6, and they are like Uganda at moderate risk of debt distress. But we also have South Sudan and Burundi that are also facing high levels of debt distress. Now, what is it that Uganda is doing? If we go back to the first page, what are the debt management strategies that we are seeing in the region? And I'm sure URA has been here. URA has been here to discuss about, because we saw them on the program. I don't know whether they've been here, but probation, that is one of the strategies that member states are doing. And Uganda is not unique when it comes to this space of improving domestic revenue mobilization. We know that URA, for example, is implementing tax compliance and efficiency. This system is being used to track specified tax payers in Uganda, and in the long run, of course, coupled with other interventions, we will see, and I think this IFRS system, of course, Ugandans will say that all the taxes are high and what have you, but the truth is that many people have also been evading taxes. So IFRS will help us in this space. And remember, we said, when we talk about the discussion on debt, it is difference between your income and your expenditure. So as government, we believe that amongst other interventions, such systems will help us tap into more revenue that will help us reduce the deficit and in the long run reduce debt. We are also thinking as the Ministry of Finance, we are thinking about, and we are working on it. We've developed a strategy to improve Uganda's creditworthiness. And one of the key indicators that show a country's creditworthiness is the per capita income of a country. So we are ranked as being, I don't know whether you've heard about the institutions, the big three credit rating institutions that rank sovereigns. Like One of them is Moody's, the other one is S&P, Standard and Poor's, and the other one is Fitch. Now, these people rank our creditworthiness as a country, and they've put us at B. Right now, we're at B, and what that means that in case of any eventualities, we could easily default on our debt. So what happens is that when institutions, financial institutions, want to lend us and they look at us and see that we are ranked as B, they increase their cost of borrowing. So, for example, if they will impose a margin of, say, if they will impose a margin of 0.5 on Japan, or on Botswana, or on Mauritius, when they want to borrow, they can impose a margin of 5.5% on Uganda. So Ministry of Finance has embarked on deliberate steps to do this. And there are many things that we are doing under this intervention. We are working with the African peer review mechanism that is able to interact with those big three. We call them the big three. You know, to review our rating reports. Because those big three are not even based here in Africa. I think what they just have a small office. I think it's Moody's or S&P that has an office in South Africa. But on the entire global continent, the big three have no presence. So how can a person that just sits in the UK or in America and begins to assess you as a country? By the way, they come here and they will ask for our numbers, they will meet us, they will meet some private sector players, and then the analysts engage us. Of course, we give them feedback, but the people who decide, the rating committees, are in Europe and in the US. So that is how we are assessed. So we are working with the African peer review mechanism to ensure that we are able to speak out more. But also Uganda has not been taking this seriously. They think, okay, we are just rated. Okay, we are B, fine. So what, we are B. But now that is impacting on our debt. And we have taken deliberate effort to do this. We've come up with a strategy that is yet to be approved by top management, the top management of the ministry. That is a whole topic on its own, the credit rating strategy. Then, of course, adoption of fiscal consolidation. You know, and you know, what is fiscal consolidation? It's about taking on policies to reduce your debt accumulation. You know, a country takes on policies to reduce debt accumulation, either by increasing your revenues or reducing your expenditures. Remember where we started from? We said that if you're going to talk about debt, the first thing you need to know is that there is a deficit. So fiscal consolidation, whereby you're raising your revenues or reducing your expenditures or having a bit of both. You increase your revenues, you have measures to increase your revenues, but you also reduce your expenditures. Those are some of the things that government is doing, and I think you've heard about rationalization of government entities. That is one of the things we are doing to see how we can reduce this duplication in government down and the deficit can go down. That is one of the things that is happening. It's not easy. We are human beings. Rationalization is dealing with human beings. So it's tough. It's tough, but it's something that is being done. I think recently, the Population Secretariat handed over they are crossing over. So at least we are seeing this rationalization happening. We think that UNRWA is also now going to Ministry of Works. We believe that it's going to happen. It's challenging, but these are some of the things that are happening. Of course, it is going to be done step by step, but we hope that it can reduce government expenditure. Then government is also exploring alternative financing options. You know, government has been looking to tax revenues, increasing taxes, and borrowing. But there are also other things that government can do. And we came up with a strategy, and John, we have a few copies of the public investment financing strategy. What that is supposed to help us achieve is to help us leverage into non-debt. Of course, there are other debt financing options, but there are also options that are non-debt creating. And these are small things that we think are small, but are able to help us raise revenues or raise financing for government programs. And I'll give us an example. If we remember during the COVID-19 pandemic, the president stood up and he appealed to Ugandans to come in and help make contributions, for personal protective gear. People contributed personal protective gear. Some people gave in cars. Some people gave in money. And what that financing option is called, it is called crowdfunding. And that is one of the options that we are proposing in the public investment financing strategy. The challenge with crowdfunding is that at that time, there was no policy to follow in using that kind of financing. So, of course, people will say, well, we don't know how much was collected, we don't know where it went, but the fact is that it is an option that can be explored. If well regulated and managed, it can bring in non-debt financing. And I mean, if you have more of non-debt financing, then you're able to reduce on borrowing and therefore the level of debt. In the financing strategy, we also have ways and means of improving foreign direct investment. We have options like tapping into remittances. You know how much money, maybe some of us seated here have relatives that send money to Uganda. You know, send you money to build a house or to pay for somebody's school fees. And the people in the diaspora are looking for credible ways of utilizing that money. So as government, we are coming up with policies and procedures of how that money can be leveraged to finance government programs. Other countries have what is known as the diaspora bond, where they just said this bond, the people in the diaspora will invest in it, and it could be used to build a road or construct a hospital, and then government pays them money. You may not give them market rate interest rates, but you may give them something, a safe place where they can invest their money. So that is one of, we are exploring alternative financing options. Sorry, I'd forgot. There is exploring alternative financing options. Then, of course, I believe maybe some of us have heard about the public investment management system, where before financing or before government borrows for a project, that project must have a feasibility study. What has been happening? We begin to look for money for projects before there's even a feasibility study. And if there's no feasibility study, you don't know what actual amount you're going to borrow. But also, you borrow, there's no feasibility study, you have not compensated people, you're paying commitment fees on debt, and you can't even start the project. So we are saying, under the public investment management system, that a project must have a feasibility study before we even go out to borrow. So borrowing comes at the tail end. And by the way, it is serious. People are dancing in the corridors these days. They come, they're very confident, oh, we can give you money and what have you. And we are like, okay, thank you. You're able to finance this project, but you have not been approved under what is known as the development committee we've not seen your feasibility study. So this is something that I have seen that is really, really working. Then otherwise our debt rate would even be higher. Then of course government is also taking on public debt reforms. EAC member states are making effort to enhance transparency in public debt management, improve financial governance, and reduce inefficiencies in public spending through what is known as performance policy actions. Now, we are working in collaboration with multilateral organizations like the World Bank. They came up with what is known as performance policy actions. And of course, this came in after around COVID time, because they were saying that our debt was rising and going over the roof. Of course, we have these ambitious programs, and they said, okay, for you to qualify for concessional financing, we are going to require you to do certain things. You set your own performance policy actions and you sit down and agree with them. For example, in 2023, one of our performance policy actions was that we would not borrow from external sources an amount higher than $3.5 billion. So if you have such limits, you are able to manage your debt, other than having an open check where you can go in and borrow. So these performance policy actions, by the way, there are many. We have performance policy actions on debt limits, on debt transparency. There are others in tax. For example, one of the performance policy actions under tax was to ensure that cabinet approves the tax policy. I wish the tax bills that put you in check. But at the end of it all, what are you looking at? You're saying, the World Bank is saying, if you are able to maintain or to work within this level, then you can. And I mean, who doesn't want concessional debt? Which country does not want concessional debt? Because it is spread over a long time and it is cheap. We are saying ourselves, I think the most expensive loan in our portfolio right now is about 10% in foreign currency. But when we are given debt on concessional terms, you can have your rate as low as 0.75%, and those are World Bank terms. So that is another thing that we are doing. We are working with them. They are putting us in check. We have people that we are accountable to. I'm not saying we are 100%. Sometimes we fail, but we have a goal to achieve. Then we are also doing what is known as active debt management. What this means, there are so many things that you can do to manage debt actively. You can hedge. We have one loan in our portfolio where we hedged. Sometimes I don't want to talk about these things because I fear that, because I want to come along with you when I begin to talk about the European bank offer rate and the secured overnight funding rate. When we are borrowing, we can borrow. When we are borrowing, we are either borrowing at fixed rates or we are borrowing at variable rates. So when we borrow at variable rates, there is a component of that variable rate that is moving, and that is what I'm calling the secured overnight funding rate, which you can abbreviate as SOFR, European Interbank Offer Rate, Euribor. Now, that part of the variable debt that is moving, you can fix it. You can fix it. Right now, SOFR is at about 4 point something. And then the Euribor part, the one that goes for euros, is at 2.6 right now. You can wake up tomorrow, they're going down. Those variable parts are going down. I think a year ago, Euribor was at about 3.8. So you can fix that and say, I don't want this moving part of my debt to go beyond a certain amount. And so that helps you to predict your debt service and and to manage your debt. So that is one of the things we are doing. And we did that on the Karuma loan. Right now, SOFRA is at 4.3. SOFRA, yes. Yeah, 4.3. SOFRA is at 4.3%. But when we got into the Karuma loan in 2015, SOFRA, which was then called LIBOR, they've changed names. It was at 0 point something. But we knew that if a variable rate is low, it will only definitely go higher. So we hedged it at 2.58%. So right now, remember, we have said SOFRA is at 4.3. So hadn't we hedged, we would be paying an interest rate of 4.3 plus the margin that is 3 point something. Domestic debt portfolio, when you have a lot of money that is falling due in a season, and you know that the rates are not going to be as high as the rate at which you contracted the instrument, you can say, let's switch this debt. And you talk to the market players, you talk to the market participants, you talk to the holders of those securities, and when they accept, you're able to switch your debt. And we did this this year. And so we were able to manage our debt service payments. Another thing that we are doing, and ESC countries are doing, is enhancing transparency and accountability. We publish debt statistical bulletins. I think the latest we have is at June 2024 on the website. So everybody is free to Google public debt statistical bulletins, Uganda, or you can find them on the Ministry of Finance website. So you're able to critique us, and when it comes to debt numbers, they're there for us to use. But we are also prioritizing concessional financing. Remember, we talked about the policy performance actions. We are working with those multilaterals and saying we need to get this concessional debt in. But we are also saying that before, there are people, by the way, debt management is a very challenging place to work in, because very powerful people will go up to the president and say, we have this money, and then the president will come to us and say, so and so has this money. But when you look at the money they are giving you, it's too expensive. But we have had, I must say that the president has really supported us on this. When we do our analysis, we get back to him and say, Mr. President, the people that you sent us, these are the numbers, but this is what our public debt framework says about taking on such financing. So this is another area that is working out well for us. We have the support of the president when it comes to terms of financing. He's able to talk to the people that go to them and say, please go back and revise your terms. If you want to finance projects in my country, go back and finance your terms. If you have these terms, then you can come back. I talked about continued collaboration between countries. The IMF and the World Bank gave us money during COVID-19, fairly cheap money. So that is why you see when the AHA issues came up, we may be inclined to certain different beliefs, but we are in this world and we have to find a way of leveraging into these partnerships. Then, of course, sensitization of stakeholders on debt matters to facilitate understanding. That is why when you invite us, we come, so that we are able to discuss and aid understanding of these things amongst ourselves. We believe that if you can be our advocates out there, then maybe people will tap into government programs and understand why certain things have to be done. That can also help us bring down our debt. But also strengthening supervision of state-owned enterprises to minimize government exposure to contingent liabilities. I mean, we have so many state-owned enterprises, National Water, UEDCL. I mean, government is doing these people so that we are able to get the best out of them. We don't keep capitalizing them and giving them the net, because some of them employ in there and mismanage, and at the end of the day, government has to pay from limited resources, limited revenues, but also sometimes we have to borrow. Right now, I mean, we are borrowing for Meme. We know that the concession is ending in March. We have to go in there and pay off Meme so that government can either take over or find a way of, or if government feels the best way is to bring in another operator, they come in. But right now we need money to first buy them out. So it is important that these entities are well supervised, so that the cost of running them is not over the roof. I think I'll stop here. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the, I see Henry. Henry wants to fire you maybe. Thank you very much. Can we give her another round of applause? Thank you very much. And maybe I think we are going to test if they were really attentive to get to know what is happening in Uganda and how maybe in one way link with what is happening within the ESC and other member states when it comes to aspect of debt. Because at the end of the day, we know that because of the inadequate tax revenue mobilization and the bigger plans for the nations, we end up at the end of the day borrowing. And the question is, how are we borrowing? How are we investing the money? Do the people know? Is there value for money when it comes to the money we borrow and how we invest it in our economy? So to me, I had written down some issues, but I want to get to know what others have. I'm not going to use the other approach of yesterday. I'm going to give the powers to the people to make the decision. And who are those ones who have issues to put across? It can be questions, clarifications. Okay.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Ismail Ladu. So I have seen reports, including one by the Auditor General and other debt experts, and it indicates that it's 10 to 15% higher than the official debt that the ministry tend to present. Have you taken note of that? And do you ever think of reconciling these two? Because that 10, 15, sometimes even 20% higher is quite disturbing, and we tend to believe those figures than the one you present to us. Then when you speak of hedging, my understanding is that that is either recklessness or carelessness, because you don't have to hedge if there was plan to absorb that loan. So does that speak to unpreparedness of people who contract this loan? They contract it maybe for the sake of it, without no proper plan for absorption. Then lastly, what comprises these debts? Because do things like litigation, compensation, arrears also part of the debt? If not, how do you categorize or classify them? Thank you.
I'm Nebat Rugadia, Uganda Radio Network. concessional loans, you talked about the IMF, the World Bank, but I just wanted to find out if the issues between the government and the World Bank over AHA, which threatens our future loans, were resolved.
Good morning. I'm James Kenya from Transparency International Kenya, and I have 3 questions. You've talked about performance policy actions as the conditionalities for World Bank and IMF in issuing the concessional loans. And I hope you are very much aware of the Gen Z protest in Kenya that just ended recently. And as you may know, these conditionalities are partially part of the reasons that the youth went to the streets, and it's what fueled those demonstrations. So, as a result of that, you know, they come up with austerity measures, asking governments to reduce subsidies, to cut on spending or for public services, and as well increase taxes and such, and it makes life unbearable. So is this really a good way to go? And as you know, the Swahili say, ukiona cha mwenzako chanyolewa, chako tia maji, which tends to mean, if you see your neighbor's head getting shaved, be ready because you might be next. And so, are you not afraid? Are we not, as EAC, taking this as a learning opportunity to have best practices to avoid all these things, to avoid these issues of debt distress? Question number 2, you've also talked about active debt management. And I'm just wondering, is transparency part of active debt management? You've talked about partially in terms of occasionally publish. Do you update the data? And do you also make the loan contractual agreements public? Because that's also part of transparency, so that the citizenry can do the analysis for itself, for themselves rather. And my very last question is on the budget deficit. You know, I just get to wonder, every other year, we are having budget in Kenya, in Tanzania. Can't we revise our activities downwards, and so that our budgets downwards, so that they can suit and get to match up the kind of revenues that we collect as EAC countries? So why not live within our means? I mean, even myself in my own household, if I see things are getting bad, I will revise my budgets downwards and live within my means. We are the same people running governments. Why can't we adopt this model and implement it in government, not only in our?
Thank you, Madam. I wanted to find out what is happening with our domestic borrowing, because yesterday we were discussing here, and besides the cost of the loans we are getting from IMF and so on, we also have the issue of marginalization as African countries. What is happening with our, because in Uganda here we have investing for these expensive loans which are frequent. Every year we have to borrow, every year we have to borrow, every year we have to borrow. And part of my question, Aloysius hinted on it, is our rate of borrowing correlating with the development in terms of utilizing in terms of utilizing the money we have borrowed? We have had a number of supplementaries. What is the planning by the Minister of Finance in terms of budgeting and, you know, and managing our debt? Because this will never end. And what is happening, apparently, we are just paying the interest, or we are just servicing the loan. We are not even touching on the principal, according to the information I'm getting.
Domestic debt, eh?
Yes. So I would like to get a clear, some clarification on that.
The woman can wait. All right. I have one or two questions. The rest are comments. Umeme concession is ending, and you are buying them out. Why don't you just sit and wait and the concession ends? The second one is debt buying. There are international financing institutions which are using third parties to come and buy off debt for developing countries at a much higher rate, including individuals. There are third-party entities or individuals who lend money to governments. Okay, they buy off their debt. Let me put it that way, because that's the point I'm trying to make. They come buy off the debt that you have incurred, maybe with the World Bank, and they help you clear it. Is happening in some African countries where some corporations come and buy off the country's debt and pay off the creditor, but you either give them a resource to cover up that debt and they slow down the burden on you. But in the end, they take up much more money than what you had actually contracted with the creditor, especially when your credits, when your debts are due. So I'm wondering how government is handling such a kind of scenario, because it's a growing syndicate. The other one I think has been talked about, the issue of hedging. I think Lado has made it very dark. Because of that limitation, you end up being, you trigger the interest to borrow locally, domestic borrowing. So don't you think that hedging is, I would say, a pretentious one? Because it doesn't solve the problem, it reverses the problem to domestic area. And when you do domestic borrowing, bring out the credit that would be available for other investors. So I think some of this needs to be revisited. Country. I think that's a very bad idea. Why? Because our brothers, sisters, and mothers who are out there, who have gone to do modern slave trade, are sending show services and domestic livelihoods where government has failed. So now when you say that government now wants to tap into those resources and begin to tap into the remittances, you are robbing the people. Because it's not an income, it's just somebody feeding his family. The other one is, why are we failing to finance our economy? Somebody said, why are we failing to live within our means? I think for me that would be the best thing that we should be doing. We are also listening too much to the World Bank, IMF, and the rest. Can't we begin to listen to ourselves? Because I think when I look for me, I've been around for some time. So now we are shifting from the program, from the sector-wide planning and budgeting to now program-based planning. We have done program-based planning before the sector-wide. So we keep chasing our tail because we are listening to the World Bank advice. And I keep asking this question. Show me one country in the world which has been developed because of the World Bank support. China. But the Chinese in the 1960s took up advice from the World Bank, twisted it, domesticated it, and moved on. Now everybody can see what has happened. Botswana can be rated low because it is putting money into the World Bank. Most of the African countries are borrowers. We claim to be members of the World Bank, but we are members because we are borrowing members. We don't seem to contribute to the bank, and therefore we don't have a veto power, voting power. So they cannot look at us as serious partners, because if you're a partner, you must be contributing to the partnership. But for you, are taken away from the partnership. So the World Bank won't take you seriously. The other thing is about the rating. They are rating us B classification. Yeah, I see you shaking your head and fingers. They are classifying us low because, by the way, it's a mechanism. I want to just share with you that this rating mechanism is a mechanism of trying to siphon money out of the developing countries. The rating system does not even take into account the natural resources that you have and use that as basis of credibility. Yeah? If they were using that, I don't think you'd even be in this classification. So you're taking more money, you're using that mechanism to actually charge us a higher interest, higher rate, and that is one of the mechanisms of moving money out of the developing South. We need an African rating mechanism. Why are you so shy, Africans, to actually develop your own rating mechanism? You have the Africa peer review mechanism. Why can't it do that? And why must we wait for our Caucasian brothers to determine our rating when they're using our own data? Can't you rate yourselves? Sometimes I question, why do we even use GDP and use the parameters that we use to measure GDP that does not include the value of the commodities that we host? We all know that developing South is a very rich area. Why can't we use the natural resources that are in stock or in place to be able to do our own rating, and then we can have a conversation? And lastly, I think we need to begin to develop our own financial architecture that is going to help us to have a negotiating power with our peers, our colleagues on the other side of the world. I submit. Thanks.
Can I take those first? Because I might forget. Okay. So, thank you very much for your comments and your questions. I'll begin from the tail end and then I'll go to the ones that we responded on first. He talked about developing our own financial architecture. That is why we are tapping into, we are first of all sensitizing. We talked about sensitization of stakeholders on debt matters. And one of the issues in this point is that we would want stakeholders and the public to understand more about domestic debt. If you are looking, for example, if you look at the debt Japan's is 250 as of 2024, as of this year, but they're more developed than we are, but most of their debt is in domestic, in local currency. So it is very easy for you to develop your economy if you're borrowing domestically, because you're generating your revenues domestically and you're paying back domestically. You don't have to grapple with exchange rate losses and the like. So one of the objectives of debt management is to develop the domestic financial market, and this is is a long-term goal that government is handling. But of course, as Uganda is, we are still grappling with many things and we are taking small steps, but I don't know in how many years the financial market in Uganda will have developed, but that is where we are heading. Government has also come up with, in a bid to bring in more people to invest in government securities, to lend more into government, because the gentleman there was saying that there are so many private players, so many people that have a lot of money. Why doesn't government borrow from them? Government has come up with a system called Okusevinga, where even the man at the grassroots is able to invest into government securities, to lend into government, so that we develop our domestic financial market. And you know that the more people lend to government, the lower it goes. If for those that have studied economics, there's the law of demand and supply. So if there's an increased supply of investors in government securities, then we shall see the rate on domestic debt going down. So that is one of the steps that we are taking as a country to develop our own financial architecture, the Okusevinga project. It's going to be launched maybe in 3 months' time. Then the gentleman talked about rating, classifying as B. He said that we are classified as B, but rating issue is a very wide topic. And he rightly put it that if they brought in other factors in the criteria, like maybe looking at our they actually look at resources, but there are issues to do with the environment. If, for example, we were rated based on carbon emissions are not as concentrated in Uganda as compared to countries like China. So China would probably get a 20% when it comes to pollution, and because we don't have, compared to other countries, relatively high pollution, Uganda would maybe score an 80%, and that would increase our rating. So I don't agree when you say that we should be rated C, because there are things that Uganda is doing right, and there are things that are done when it comes to the rating. Unfair in biases against African countries that are done against us. So for us, we are looking to improve our rating. Being an African rating agency, it is surprising that it is some countries that are fighting this. Actually, in collaboration with different governments, including Uganda, we are coming up with an African rating agency. But if I question, if you walk into a shop and you find a pair of shoes made in Uganda and made in Italy, which one will you buy? We as Ugandans and Africans need to change our mindset. We need to believe in ourselves. We've had these debates about an African rating agency, and there are some countries, Northern Africa, that are not supportive of it. They're like, can we do it? They don't believe that we can do it. But some of us are saying, it doesn't matter how long it's going to take. We are going to take small steps, but we shall take these steps. And it is something that is being done in collaboration with the APRM and the United Nations program, the UNDP. Can't we listen to ourselves? You are so right on this. And that is what I just said a few seconds ago. We need to believe in ourselves. We need to do certain things. Of course, there are things that have gone wrong regarding collaboration with these multilaterals, but I think things are changing slowly. That is why you see the president can stand up and say, go and revise your terms. I mean, we should follow his lead in several aspects where things are being done properly. He will tell people, go and revise your terms. You foreigners, you're telling me A, B, C, D. But many of us even believe in Uganda. So let us begin believing in ourselves, and then we shall be able to stand up to some of these big guns. The gentleman mentioned and said remittances is a bad idea, but remittances is a way of helping people in the diaspora to make some money off their savings. Yes, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of stories where people in the diaspora have sent their money to construct houses. And when the person comes back, it's not a house, but a boys' quarter. There is no house at all. So we are saying that, I mean, this is one of the ways really to help people in the diaspora to make some money of themselves, so that once they are paid back this money, they're able to, once they return, they're able to make their various development, to meet their different development objectives. You talked about PPAs leading to supplementaries, and therefore leading to wing. Well, we must have, what should I call them? Just have no boundaries. And of course, supplementaries, as a result sometimes of pressures that come, that are unplanned for, but sometimes we ourselves poorly plan because we leave out very important things and we put into the budget things that are not that important because we know that we are going to get supplementaries. So again, this goes back to we as Ugandans, we ourselves, we who are working in these places. How are we planning? How are we budgeting? Then the gentleman again talked about buying off countries' debt. We have had so many people come, and you remember when I had just started speaking, I said that debt is very, very challenging. People that have an open door to the president, they just walk in there and they tell the president, you know what, president, we can buy off your debt. We have had this experience. We have had to fight battles over some of these things because we know that if somebody comes in and says, buy off your debt, then it is not free. You ask them, how are you going to buy off this debt? First of all, this debt, there are agreements that pertain to this debt. There's so much you have to do to be able to buy off debt, but thank God they have not succeeded yet, and that is why I said the president listens. When we write those papers and explain to him, my experience is that he has listened to many of these debt issues. So for now, we are still safe, and we pray that we continue to be safe in this area. But it also goes back to training and to technical capacity and to willingness to do the right thing. Then what is happening with domestic debt? Like I said, we are sensitizing the public. So is our rate of borrowing correlating with development? Remember in my opening remarks, I said that two things, deficit and utilization. And that is why we are saying, if we are going to borrow, there must be a feasibility study. That is how we will be able to get value for money. But if you think about 46.9, or if you think about 25, because our debt is 25, our stock of debt as at June 2024 is 25.6 billion dollars. If you think about it, that 26.5, do we have much to show? Well, we have certain things to show, but frankly speaking, I think there could be more. There should have been more to show for that kind of level of debt. But one of the ways that that's happening is that the public investment management system, there must be a feasibility study for us to be able to borrow. We are paying interest and not principal. That is true, of course, because of the huge deficit. We are not on domestic debt. We are, by the way, paying our principal on external, but because we have that advantage of being able to borrow, actually we are paying our principal on domestic debt. But what we do is rolling over. We borrow to pay. We are paying our principal, but we are borrowing to pay it. And sometimes we borrow to pay it at lower interest rates. So that is another way of managing our deficit. Is transparency part of active debt management? How often do we publish debt statistical bulletins? We do that on a quarterly basis with a 2-month lag. For example, the must have been published by September 15th, a 2.5 months lag. By the 15th of the next, by the 15th of the 3rd month after the quarter, the bulletin should be out. Can't we revise our activities downwards? Of course we can. Remember, we talked about the managing debt as fiscal consolidation, where you either raise your tax revenues or reduce your expenditures, or do both. But for you to cut your tax expenditures, you must be very careful that you're not cutting social spending, and that is spending on things like education, health, but also capital investments. Otherwise, you will be constraining growth in the long run. So there's a delicate balance between when it comes to cutting expenditures. But like we talked about rationalization, government has identified areas where we can cut expenditures and therefore be able to reduce the budget deficit. But right now we have, huge development needs as stipulated in our national development plan, and yet we still have to cater for people in the health sector. We have to do that in education and other social sectors. So it is a bit difficult in that area, but it is something that government is doing. Then PPAs as a conditionality, you said that it fueled demonstrations. By the way, it is countries that come up with their own targets. You say, this is what we want to achieve. I mean, if you know your weaknesses and you're like, I am overweight, I enjoy sausages and cake and burgers and pizza, but I'm setting myself a target. I can only eat a burger after I have achieved this. So you set your own targets, and then you sit on the table and discuss, is World Bank agreeable? Are you agreeable? And then you set out to work. It is not something that you do on your, that the World Bank dictates. PPAs are not dictated on us. And so we are not afraid. We believe that these are things that we can meet. Like that the bulletin was a PPA. We used to produce that bulletin sometimes with a 4-month lag. But right now we are producing it with a 2.5 months lag, because you don't want to produce it after 4 months and your data has expired, you have moved on. So we are working towards that, and sooner they might bring it on the table and say, but can't you produce this bulletin with 1.5 months? So, and we managed to achieve the bulletin with a 2.5 months lag. Then were the issues of AHA resolved? There's progress in this area. That's why we can comfortably talk about the World Bank. There's progress in this area. There was a meeting regarding AHA, and I believe that and the meeting was to resolve, to find out if Uganda has, done what it says it will do. So this is something that should not worry us. Then do you ever think of reconciling debt numbers? Yes, this came from my friend Ismail. He said that there's a divergence, a difference between 10 to 15% regarding the numbers. Yes, and that is because of how you report debt. Some people report, we at the Ministry of Finance, the number that we show people is the stock number, the number that has been disbursed to us. That is the number for which we are obliged to pay back. But entities like Bank of Uganda report what is known as the stock, but also the undisbursed money for which you have signed an agreement, but it has not come into your coffers. So you cannot pay back what causes that difference. But sometimes it is the exchange rate that you convert that. Some people use what is known as the mid. I think Bank of Uganda uses the mid rate. They will add the buying and the selling over 2. and that is what they'll use to convert into one currency. You know that our debt is composed of euros, of pounds, of Chinese yuan, of Japanese yen, so all that debt has to be converted into the US dollar, and that sometimes actually it has a big effect on the number, the outcome. You are most likely to come up with different numbers, and it's difficult to say now, Bank of Uganda, you're producing your report at such and such a time, you use this number. Well, we can do that, but it might be a little bit difficult. But these are some of the reasons why the numbers are usually different. Then he talked about, I think somebody talked about domestic areas, what goes in there. What goes into, do we include areas? Do we include outcomes of litigations and what have you? No, we do not do that. So our debt is only purely external debt and domestic debt, discussing to find, because it's a huge debate and it's something that we are internally discussing, and it is something that going forward we will be including in our bulletins. Then hedging, we are thinking about hedging as carelessness or recklessness, but it is actually, it's not recklessness. Like, remember we talked about there's that moving part of debt. Variable rate debt moves, that portion that I talked about. Don't hedge, you will pay very high interest rates. And remember that debt, sometimes this debt is over 10 years. So because you want to manage your interest rate over that period of 10 years, you must find ways of debt, of hedging your debt. But you must know when to hedge. You must know the right time to hedge. You must know the cost, the right cost of hedging. Otherwise, you would be taken for a ride. But right now, we are benefiting on the Karuma loan. Many of us did not like this hedging at first, but now we are seeing the benefits. It is surprising that I personally was one of those people who was saying, because at that time, LIBOR was at 0.5. Then it started going up. It went beyond 2.58, it went to 3, it went to 3.5. By the way, when it rises up above the point that you have hedged, the benefit is when it rises up, when that variable rate rises above the point at which you have hedged, you begin benefiting. Instead of paying a variable rate of 4%, you pay 2.5%, and the person that took on the risk pays you that difference. Maybe that is one thing I did not explain. Let me explain it again. We hedged the Karuma loan at 2.58%. We hedged LIBOR. At that time, it was called LIBOR to 4%. Hedged, we would be paying 4%. So it is not recklessness. It's not carelessness, because of the fact that, and many, it is practice that is done worldwide, everywhere, to manage debt. I think for now that, I hope I've not left out anything. Yeah. And John, do you have anything to add on anything? I think John will answer the next round.
Thank you. I think before I bring in this is just different and a quick one. I'm just announcing for those of us who have not checked out at the reception, please let us do that before 11:30. In case it passes even just 1 minute, the charge is going to be tagged on the person, the beneficiary, or you, not CRT. So please, let's comply. Let's move out and check out nationals and also other people. Let's check out only those ones having their flights tomorrow 13th. I think there are something like 3 people to 4.
Right person to answer the question we're raising. First of all, one, I really needed to hear from you how many often do you do a debt sustainability analysis to exactly know how are we sustaining this. And then I've been with people who use credit cards, and every time they go to shop and you ask, why are you putting this? They say, when I fail to pay, the government will do what? Will pay. But our question here, who is going to pay this? And the reason why I'm bringing that is because I don't think we have negotiators. You are paying interest, but you are not paying on principal.
We are paying.
You are paying.
We are paying.
Okay, then that one you don't need to answer. But my question is, between Minister of Finance and Bank of Uganda, do we have negotiators? Not as civil society, because for us will make noise. Last year I saw people at World Bank, they even chased people who were putting on badges of debt cancellation, right? As civil society will talk, will come here and talk, we need debt relief, we need to interest release. But then, as a country, we need negotiators who can negotiate on behalf of the country. That maybe those rich countries can buy our debt and pay on our behalf. And lastly, that's why I said mine are not questions, maybe. And lastly, why do we borrow money that is not going to bring us, to bring back what we can use to pay the other loans? It is not also for you a question to answer, but in our negotiations, can we say, government, we have priorities? When we're trading on budget, people ask questions. Why is it that Uganda runs a deficit budget? And then we have this thing of like, it is only about 4 countries in the world that run the surplus budget, you know? And it becomes a fear. Thank you.
My name is David. Thank you very much for enlightening us. The other day we had a planned expenditure of 53 trillion and it turned into 73 in one night. I doubled what can be realized domestically. I know you're not a part of those conversations. In passing, you said the electronic fiscal receipting and invoicing solution will help us, but that is just a solution to help monitor. The IFRIS. Okay. You said some people were evading, and those are some of the things that have come on board and they will help on the DRM. But my thinking is that for starters, we need to work on our expenditure. You don't just double. Right now, I can't just decide to drive a Range Rover. And every month, someone talked about, as a family man, I can't have triple the expenditure as income coming in. I will not survive. And so it's a little confusing that we have professionals, people like you. You're doing your work. Of course, we have the higher people. The PSST started a program. He came and decided he's not going to buy cars in 2-3 years. He started well, but it's like you won him over. Okay, the guys around government won him over. He didn't want to pay for first-class tickets. He wanted to, I think Magufuli budget, this rationalization was coming in. Some of the rationalization that you're talking about, it's not helping on service delivery. It's actually going to worsen on service delivery. And we have proof. We've come from where we didn't have some of these these mechanisms, and now we are saying we want to, we're calling them parasites. Yeah, Mzee called them parasites and so on. But when you look at service delivery, we need some of these mechanisms. The public service not handle where we are. And so I feel we there are things that we can do. But of course, you've talked about our plan. We have a big parliament. Okay, there are so many things. There are big elephants in the room that we can talk about. We are going around and talking about rationalization, but our parliament is big. Our cabinet is big. Okay, we have a lot of expenditure health-wise. We have spent on health, but the number of people that have flown out to go and spend out there, yes, we have plans of the hospitals. There's so many things that we have planned on that are not working. Those planned hospitals and some of the things that we keep injecting money into, and we're not talking about them. We're not, yes, the public is talking about them. And right now we're reaching levels where we're going to have, I love the Gen Z approach, because they even talked about the office of the First Lady. They talked about obese budgets, but things that are that are not adding value. And I think it's important for us to start having these conversations. Since you talk to, I know I've experienced where anyone that goes to the president and he feels it's a good idea, he'll even sign and say, go, and he'll even issue. But I think we are shooting ourselves in the leg over some of the things that we're doing, and the expenditure is way up there. There's a lot that we can cut and be able to live within our means. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last one.
Thank you so much. I'm Sophie Ndagire, and I have a concern on the issue of debt utilization. You pointed out something to do with feasibility studies being carried out on projects as a recommendation or something. But then my concern is also on these partnerships we make already with the funded projects that are ongoing, despite the fact that they may have gone through a feasibility study, but ongoing. We are seeing that the contract is ending, but then we see that the services provided by Umeme were actually are very expensive for us as the citizens of Uganda. So we see that electricity is very expensive, despite of the fact that government is borrowing to fund, to partner with Umeme. So my concern is maybe with the next partnership we are to make, they need to track down on these projects such that they actually benefit us, the Ugandans, rather than making them more expensive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we don't have time. Please, one question if you can, just briefly. Yes.
Okay, my name is Ali Traha and I work with New Vision. Just a quick one on, you hinted on issues of concessional debt. And one thing I know is that we don't have, the leg room to get more concessional debt out there. See what the World Bank is doing. The IMF is also saying, they see no signs of. When you look at the debt numbers right now, the biggest cost of our debt repayment is actually going to non-concessional debt. And this is our local debt here that government contracts. So my issue is really on where are we looking for, cheaper debt? because, cheaper debt. Because the cost drivers right now that we have, and many of our colleagues here raised the issue, we are paying a lot in interest, but what many may not know is that interest is actually being on what we call the local debt or domestic debt. So in terms of the concession, where are we looking to get cheaper debt? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mine is not a question. My name is Cyrus from Governance for Africa, and I'm from Rwanda. There's something you said which I believe it won't happen and it cannot happen. Where you said that you're going to work with APRM on rankings. I am a pioneer of the APRM Youth Network. First of all, APRM is an organ of the African Union, so is get funding from the member states. So it's very hard, even at the ES level. You can't do ranking as a state unless you know you're creating a war of bilateral disagreements. So when you're receiving money from a member state and you say now I'm going to make Uganda the last, so you'll be causing problems. So it needs an independent institution to do that, but not intergovernmental institution or a public institution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. I wanted to just say that I will be the last one to ask. Maybe you can help me. It is not like questions per se, but you said that we are based on the feasibility studies on the debts we are acquiring. Why are we continuing to have commitment fees? And I saw it even in the budget 2024-2025. Two is on the fiscal consolidation. I think we have failed. You can give me your perspective. We are not. Okay, the percentages is there, but when you look at what we're supposed to do, we are not. Reducing on the budget deficit. I don't know, in your perspective. And lastly, there was a question from our board who was saying that maybe you can help us even to learn from you. Why are we continuing to say that it is something which you can try to explain? Why are we considering saying that it is domestic borrowing when we are borrowing from it is not my perspective, but was his perspective. So he was saying, why are we continuing to consider domestic borrowing when we are borrowing from banks that are not Ugandan banks, and at the end of the day, when we pay, they repatriate the interest or the money which we have borrowed from them. So should it be considered a domestic debt or domestic borrowing? So maybe if I didn't get it clearly, maybe you can help us to understand that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those questions. So why are we saying domestic borrowing, and yet we are borrowing from banks like Stanbic, ABSA, Standard Chartered? In debt, we know we can classify debt as debt by residence and debt by currency. If we are borrowing money through government securities, through ABSA Bank or Stanchart or Stanbic or any other international bank, and that bank is a resident of Uganda, that will be domestic borrowing. In Uganda, we classify debt that will be domestic borrowing. Sorry, in Uganda I said that we classify debt either by residence or by currency. If you're borrowing money in local currency, even if you're borrowing it from ABSA and you're borrowing it in local currency, that will be domestic debt. If you're borrowing it in foreign currency, that will be foreign debt. But had we, if Uganda was classifying our debt by residence, if a bank in South Africa lent us money but in local currency, that would be foreign currency. But that is very complicated. So we classify our debt by currency. If it is in UGX, it is domestic debt. If it is in foreign currency, it is external debt. Fiscal consolidation. The gentleman has said we have failed, and I'm just asking us to be patient. We've just started the journey of fiscal consolidation. Of course, he actually answered his own question and said, I know the numbers are there, but the utilization, we have so many needs. So every time the target is moving, the revenue target keeps moving. But I think that URA is doing a lot to increase revenues, and as a Ugandan, I think that we are trying. We have not failed. It's too early to say that we have failed. Then commitment fees. He said that we say that we are putting in place, we are advocating for feasibility studies and what have you, but we are paying commitment fees. Why? We know that a project cannot be implemented in a day. Some of these projects take 2, 3, 4 years to be implemented. So if I've borrowed $100 million and I'm supposed to execute a project over 3 or 4 years, that money will be released to me as and when certain phases of the project are done. So the money that has not been released will attract a commitment fees. So even if the project is ready, okay? Even if the project is ready, if you are going to execute that project over a period of time, you will be required to pay commitment fees. And that is why the project must be ready so that that money is disbursed, so that the cost of commitment fees is low. But of course, it's also important to negotiate a minimum rate on commitment fees. Then Cyrus talked about saying we cannot achieve an African rating agency. Didn't I tell you that there are non-believers in Africa? Yeah, I said there are non-believers in Africa. He said it will not happen. Actually, after that, at least he softened it a bit and said it is very hard. Yes, it is very hard. But like I said, we have to believe in ourselves, and we have to go for this African Credit Rating Agency. This rating agency is going to be like some collective or regional projects. Of course, different people will be employed in that rating agencies. The methodology is going to be very clear. So it's not a matter of saying I'm rating Uganda down, I'm rating Uganda up. It's like the African Union. You go in there, you vote, you find out who is the best leader, and you take them on. So I believe it's going to be something like that. And we have started. I am a member. I attend these APRM meetings. So I believe it is something that is going to happen, because we believe. And by the way, it's called the African Credit Rating Agency. It's ACRA. The ACRA is not for starters, it's going to be a complementary rating agency. Our countries will continue to be rated by Standard & Poor's, by Moody's and what have you, but we will start this journey by seeing how ACRA rates us, and it will be an agency that checks what these other rating agencies have done to trigger discussion. So I am a strong believer that the ACRA is going to happen. Then the lady asked, how often do we do a DSA? We do a DSA every year, and you can find it published on the website. On credit cards, government will pay. I don't really think so. Then you asked, I do not think we have negotiators. I just, what kind of negotiators are you looking at? Are you talking about people who negotiate our loans, or people who negotiate the different government programs? Both. Mm. Yes. Mm. Mm.
First of all, who can negotiate on debt cancellation, or what Henry was saying in terms of we can sell the debt to developed countries to help
Okay.
us pay some of the principal maybe. Then on the other side is who negotiates the loans that we get. If let's say, let's say Karuma,
Yes.
who
Yes.
negotiates about who negotiates on what interest the government can pay, because sometimes I will just use that I will just use an example of spaces where we find ourselves, like in spaces. An international in an international membership, you find they say if you are from less developed countries, you can pay $50 per year. But from developed countries, you pay $200 per year. So I wanted to understand, in Uganda, do we have such a negotiations?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, we have an office in the Ministry of Finance called Development Assistance and Regional Cooperation. It is the department that takes lead in negotiation, but negotiations are done collectively. You will have that department, you will have the people that analyze debt, you will have the people that understand the project, you'll have the people that have done that are the sectors, the people that are supposed to implement the project, you'll have the financials in the room. Like I said, debt management is not a walk in the park. Many people, like many people will stand out there and I think we try. We have negotiators. Maybe in brief, that's what I should say. We have negotiators, and sometimes we may not, because we are human, we fail sometimes, but I can assure you we do our best. We research, we use international systems to find out where the rates are. For example, like Bloomberg, we benchmark with our peers. We do a lot, and people train. So the negotiators are available, and I'll tell you that we had a very good team that was negotiating with the World Bank, and like I said, a report is going to come out, because that was not an easy the challenge we had with World Bank on AHA. It was not a small thing, but you will see the results. Yeah. And then why do we borrow money for unproductive sectors, and why the deficit budget? We have so many needs, and we are a less developed countries. So and we want to do very many things. So I think this is something that I, as a technocrat, by the way, debt managers are given the deficit. The debt manager is not responsible for the level of debt. We go out there to mobilize money given whatever deficit. So this question, yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, but let me comfort you on that. There's a small book that we have. It's called the Charter for Fiscal Responsibility. It looks at the level of debt over 5 years. So in this 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026, that period is a time where we are concentrating huge infrastructure projects. And so our deficit is projected to go up even above debt to GDP of 50% because we are doing those projects. But we are projecting that after 2028, we will see our deficit going down because we will have, assuming other factors remain constant, we will have, done all those huge projects like the pipeline, the refinery, the standard gauge railway, those ones. Yes. Then the gentleman talked about IFRS being helping us, that it may not increase revenues, but at least if you're monitoring the taxpayers, then in the monitoring itself, you're able to track and see who is paying and who is not, and then you will be, nationalization will not help, but I beg to differ, because I know that sometimes it is a leadership problem. By the way, I really don't think that our challenge is because we are rationalizing and because we may not achieve because we were here. Maybe we have learned our lessons and we know how to do things better. But sometimes it is a leadership problem. So even if you stay with UNRA and you don't have a good leader, you may not deliver your results. And then the lady talked about tracking down of project performance. This is something that we have a unit in the ministry that, by the way, the permanent secretary, he's come up with this. He's very serious about tracking project performance, and those project coordinators that are not performing are supposed to be brought to book. So this is actually being done. We have a gentleman that we call a Nyampala. He is supposed to look at the performance of projects and report for follow-up. Somebody talked about us not having legroom for concessional financing, but remember we talked about performance policy actions, and if we meet our performance policy actions, then we can be able to tap into concessional debt. There's concessional debt out there, but it is what you do, what you are doing to be able to tap into it. And through the performance policy actions, Uganda, we believe that we'll be able to tap into more concessional debt. But remember, we talked about the public investment financing strategy that has other non-debt. It may not be concessional debt, but non-debt creating financing options. So we also have that, and we have embarked on implementing that strategy. So you've also heard, this may not be purely concessional, but it might be cheaper. It could be cheaper than commercial borrowing, climate finance. We are seeing grants coming in through climate finance. Just like the PPAs, there are actions that you can be able to tap into to climate finance. So depending on what we do, we believe that we still are able to tap into concessional financing. Thank you very much.
Okay, maybe just to supplement what my senior colleague has answered. I want supplement on commitment fees. A question from a gentleman there, I think a media person, was asking why government is continuing to pay commitment fees. Alongside, even when the project has been cleared by the development committee, the feasibility studies are all cleared and are available. Commitment fees arises from challenges of failure to commence the project, like acquisition of right of way is a challenge that will lead to continued payment of commitment fees by government if at that time government has not yet secured or allocated funding for counterpart funding for the project. Then it will also, government will continue paying commitment fees. As well as inadequate project preparation, if the sector is not prepared to take the project, to commence the project, it will delay the project to start, and hence government pays commitment fees. The other thing is delayed achievement of conditions precedent in the loan agreement. If those are also like procurement issues, if they are not harmonized, then the government still is subject to pay commitment fees. Then there's one of the question, World Bank versus Anti-Homosexuality Act. Maybe just to give comfort, with those engagements since 2023 when the act was consented to, there is no loan that has been deferred by the multilateral creditors, the World Bank, the IMF. We have not seen any loan that has been cancelled. There has been a positive response between the World Bank and the government of Uganda in the engagements. Then the other thing, the question on why are we getting concessional borrowing? From our debt stock, currently we have around 54% of concessional financing. Semi-concessional is 20.5, commercial, yes, commercial is increasing, but gradually at 20%. So there's still room to find concessional financing with what my senior colleague mentioned. When you fulfill the commitments of the PPAs, the IMF conditionalities, and even Islamic Development Bank, even from China in our portfolio, we still have room for concessional financing. Lastly, on negotiators, in addition to what she mentioned, the only challenge I see may be there are conditions that are set by the umbrellas like OECD. They may be very difficult to negotiate them. We have seen our team pursuing to negotiate on a bilateral arrangement, but these financials insist it requires us also to have a block like African block or East African block that gives us a leeway to say this is what the financing we are comfortable with and these conditions are our conditions. But without such blocks, even when the technical team is good in negotiating, it is hard to negotiate some conditions that are with the financials who come as a block, like export credit agencies. It is a bit tight. They continue referring to the conditionalities that are set in their block. I submit. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mutuju from Ministry of Finance and Ms. Joy Gesa for the wonderful facilitation. But we will all agree that just to address one of the concerns that you raised earlier, that there are those good steps government has taken. And I think we all agree that now Ministry of Finance is published, appreciate Ministry of Finance Uganda, because this is a sub-regional dialogue. When we talk about Ministry of Finance, we should say Uganda, so that we can be able to leave room for other countries to also confirm. At least for Uganda, there is increased transparency. And then the other issue, another fold, because of our mandate as civil society organizations, there is a lot of work that we do in order to advocate for transparency, accountability, because when we borrow, we pay using the taxpayers' money, which is very, very important for us to follow the money. Where does it go? Do we borrow for ready projects? Are we borrowing in the dark? Why are we rushing to commit? Because we've been over the years advocating for the need to commit for only ready projects. That's something that we've put on the table over the years. And we are still pushing because we are not yet there. We see government committing in a number of conferences, because I know when they approach us, like how top secret information, that a number of, but in some instances,
If the president wants, yes, because he's the fountain, send them back to us and say, Ministry of Finance, what do you think about these financing terms? He doesn't just say go and borrow. No, I think maybe you didn't get it. He comes back to us and he says, what do you think about these terms? He's been very supportive. And when we analyze and the terms are not in line with our public debt management framework, which you can also find online, we write, and he will tell his people, please go back and give me the right terms that are suitable for this project.
Thank you. I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but the issue that I was getting to is what she has also partly alluded to in a way. We are advocating for strong systems and institutions, not for people to bypass all the institutions and systems where the minister had discretionary powers in the past, to grant tax holidays. And investors would reach out to the minister. So the issue of strong systems and institutions cannot be overemphasized. We don't truly believe in the business of institutions existing, but when they are powerless, I think that should be addressed. And I truly don't want to put you on the spot any further, but to thank you. And comrades, could we give a round of applause to Ms. Joy Gesa and Mr. John Omutuju? Omutuju. Yes. Yes, the pronunciation, of course. We are coming from different parts of the country, so the pronunciation, but the true name, the right name is Mr. John Omutuju from Ministry of Finance. And she's Miss Joy Gesa, economist, Ministry of Finance, Uganda. Thanks so much for the wonderful sharing. And we truly appreciate the partnership with the Ministry of Finance. Siatini is on the Domestic Resource Mobilization Committee, which is under Ministry of Finance. And we are part of the National Budget Finance Budget Month Partners, the Budget Transparency Initiative. We are not in bed with government, but we work with government. We constructively engage government to make things happen. And we appreciate that you've opened your doors for civil society, which is very wonderful. I actually didn't introduce myself. My name is Herbert Kafero. I work with Siatini Uganda. Nice meeting you, and we will continue to engage. But there is business we have to do. The business is a press conference that we're having. And the press conference, just to assure you, we're not bashing government, but we are sharing researched information and civil society concerns around a number of issues, because this regional dialogue is under the theme of addressing the impact of illicit financial flows and debt on domestic resource mobilization in the East African community and SADC sub-regions. And we truly believe that when we put the messages out there, we can shape policy decisions and governments can be able to respond accordingly. That's why we have the Fourth Estate here with us. And we don't just work with the media as report issues, and on another time we'll call on you because we leverage technical backstopping support from people like you and Mr. John Omtuju in order to be able to have the media report effectively, but also raise awareness given their broader mandate. So I would like to just let you go and settle. Thank you so much. Do we delve right away into the press conference, or we grab a cup of tea and then get back? We have a working session. There is an arrangement we are going to make. There are seats we are going to bring just right here for the media to do what they have to do. And all of us will be in the audience to give technical backstopping support where we need to do that. And it will be short, at most 1 hour. Then we will continue with the last session of the day. I can assure you, I keep time. Yes, thank you. Believe in me, just for today. I'll surprise you. So please, then get back here. Thank you. For those of us who haven't yet checked out, we can use 5 minutes to do that. To send the message out. And like I earlier said, we treasure and appreciate your role as the media, not as reporters. In fact, Siatini elevated the role of the media to stakeholders, key stakeholders, because we believe when you understand these issues and appreciate them, you can do a better job, and we can get better economies and better service delivery, and all of us will be happy ultimately. And that's the ideal. So we are striving to achieve that ideal situation. It might seem utopian, but that's what we are going for. And with you, we will get there. So this press conference is action-oriented. We've been here, we've devised a number of strategies. A number of issues have been put on the table that are embedded within the press statement that we'll be sharing with you. And all these are geared towards addressing the issue of illicit financial flows and the issue of debt in view of their implications on domestic resource mobilization and the challenges at hand. Climate change is a reality, but even debt distress is a reality. The issue of losing resources through illicit financial flows is also a reality. And I will not preempt what the experts are going to be talking about because they are better equipped than I am. So without further ado, I would like to invite, but maybe before I actually invite the panelists, the team that is supporting with printing. And I know Aloysius is going to be sharing the press statement. Team, please. Several panelists. And I'd like to first introduce Mr. John Oduk, who is a policy analyst at the African Forum on Debt and Development, AFRODAD. So he's going to be joining us, but he can't join without a round of applause. So Mr. John Oduk, please come and take the seat. And next, we're also going to have Ms. Rurit Yugsuk, who is an outreach officer at the Institute of Public Finance in Kenya. Please take this seat right there. You know, I'm trying to balance the gender. And actually, we don't just do balancing. We are intentional on this. Yes. Because I don't want to be quoted that, oh, these people are just balancing. We are intentional on this. Thank you. So I would also like to invite Miss Irene Otieno from the East African Tax and Governance Network, EATGN. You're welcome. It would be good to take the seat right there so that, you know, there is some order in terms of the seating arrangement. And just for some information purposes, Siatini is a member of the East African Tax and Governance Network, just like many of the civil society organizations here. So this is solidarity at play. And I would also like to invite my colleague, Mr. Aloysius Chitengo, who is the program coordinator for financing for development thematic area at Siatini. Please sit right here with Irene because she whispered to me that there is some information she needs to pass on to you. So you're strategically positioned. I would like to also invite Mr. Sibanda, who is a senior economist at ZimCode. You're welcome. That round of applause is for you. Please sit right there. We also have another panelist who will be joining us, but because the seats are not enough, we will be interswitching. We will be switching and getting at least a free spot here. But what I would like to assure you is that we're going to be speaking some Swahili too. So get ready for that. Yes. So it's not only English. Swahili is coming. So, like I earlier said, this press conference is part of the regional dialogue on addressing the impact of illicit financial flows and debt on domestic resource mobilization in the ESC and SADC sub-regions. And the press conference has a theme. The theme is right here: urgent action required to tackle illicit financial flows and strengthen debt management for effective domestic resource mobilization in the ESC and SADC. So that's our theme. And the experts are going to be speaking to this. But this press conference is guided by a press statement. And Mr. Aloysius Chitengo, who is the Program Coordinator Financing for Development Thematic Area at Siatini, will be reading out loud the press statement. I request that colleagues print the press statement so that he doesn't have to scroll on the laptop to make his work easy. And let's first have that one copy that he can use, then we'll print the rest of the copies. And so, colleagues, are we excited about the press conference? My heart is saying I can't wait. And I know the feeling is mutual. Me too. Yes, so colleagues, we are yet to start, but to buy some time as our comrades are going to print the press statement, fast tracking the printing of the press statement, let me hand over the microphone to comrades here. They introduce a little bit of themselves, the organizations they work with, what those organizations do, and then we'll get into the main business. So I would like to hand over this microphone to the comrade next to me, and we'll just follow through up to Miss Irene Otieno.
Yes, thank you so much, Herbert. My name is John Oduk. I work with the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development. This is a Pan-African civil society whose mandate is on issues of debt and development finance. We have been in operation in the debt movement for the past 28 years. And as an institution, our work is categorized into 4 portfolios, with the first one being on sovereign debt management. We also have a portfolio on domestic resource mobilization, another on international public and private finance, and the last one being on legal analysis and advocacy on debt. Yes, so first of all, I have to appreciate Siatini for the invitation to be part of this amazing dialogue on the issue of IFFs. And I don't think at this moment I'd want to emphasize on the importance, because of the past 2 days. I think conversations have really dwelled on that. So definitely looking forward to the discussions. So now looking forward to how the discussions will unfold as we engage in this press conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. My name is Lurit Yugusuk. I work at the Institute of Public Finance, which is a civil society organization / think tank that heavily advances transparent, efficient, participatory, and perhaps just the idea of effective public finance systems. And our work is heavily centered on budget advocacy and trying to ensure that there's as much public participation as possible in conversations around public finance. And beyond this is the idea of offering technical assistance to governments as well, with respect to this particular conversation, and really just enhancing advocacy in itself on how to build systems that actually respond to development priorities as well as the needs of different populations. So in this particular organization, my work is heavily centered on outreach, partnerships, and the idea of civic education. Thank you very much, and happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kumbaros Banda. I'm an economist, senior economist at an organization called Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCOD in short. ZIMCOD is a civil society organization which was formed in February 2000, with the main core being to actually advocate and lobby for social and economic justice in Zimbabwe and beyond. But we have our primary focus or our main bias is on issues to do with debt, as indicated in our name, that we are a coalition on debt and development. So we do so many things, we do our flagship events in terms of we conduct what we call the annual debt conference, which is an annual event where we invite various stakeholders from government, civil society, private sector, academia, media, to actually discuss and proffer some possible solutions around addressing issues to do with the debt and sustainability in Zimbabwe and the region. We collaborate very well with Aphrodite, yes. And then our maybe a short summary, we have a strategic plan for 2023 to 2030. This plan is two-pronged. Number one is we have the fiscal justice pillar, and then number two, we have the trade justice pillar. Under the fiscal justice pillar, we cover all those matters to do fiscal, such as issues to do with illicit financing, issues to do with borrowing, etc. Also issues to do with financing of mega infrastructure, which has become some of the major drivers of debt in Africa. Then from the trade justice, of course, we are calling for a fair trade justice system at the local, regional, and global level. So in short, that's what I can say about ZIMCOD. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Irene Otieno. I'm the Executive Director at National Taxpayers Association and an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. So we are very concerned on what was happening with our learned friend Martha Karua and her attempts to represent, let me not even mention the names, but I'm also a board member at East African Tax and Governance Network, and I'll be sitting in this media briefing in that capacity as a board member of East African Tax and Governance Network. East African Tax and Governance Network is concerned on the issues of domestic resource mobilization, illicit financial flows, the issues of tax and how we raise resources as the ESC. Do our tax policies align? Where are points of divergence that we need to look at to ensure that we have one voice as we structure our tax policies and as we foster trade and related aspects within the region. When I would want also to speak a bit around the organization that I represent, which is National Taxpayers Association, is that this organization looks at the linkages between tax and service delivery. As most of us are aware, Kenya has had in the recent past, and today I'm seeing that still online, a lot of discussions around the importance and value of taxation if we do not see it reflected in terms of public service delivery. So our institution has been involved in 3 key programs. One is building citizen demand. That is where we raise the awareness of citizens to know they are the ones that fund African governments. And if you look particularly at governments such as Kenya, it is the Kenyans who fund in terms of taxes, but the respect given to taxpayers is not reflected in terms of when they do participate in public participation processes, their voice is not, doesn't find expression in terms of the budgets that are being developed. So building citizen demand is a critical program for us. Strengthening government service delivery is another program where we look at different policy options through research that we can give to our governments. And I'm happy that in this sitting, we've learned quite a lot in terms of the approach by Uganda in looking at the issues of debt, illicit financial flows, and also experiences from other countries. The third one for us is tax justice. Here we are concerned with how the taxes are redistributed. Where do the taxes that we collect go to? Do we understand that there are different issues, gender, persons with disabilities, there are people in the informal sector, so how do we redistribute tax? And in this program, we are also greatly concerned that most African countries are majorly informal, but a lot of the wages, a lot of the revenue goes to pay wages and salaries of a very small percentage. So when we look at that type of redistribution, how does this mean? What does this mean for tax morale when we say we want to increase domestic resource mobilization? So those are the three key areas that the institution is involved in, and we are really privileged to have been part of this convening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Irene Otieno and all the comrades here. And there's something that she pointed out, the issue of regional approach. And I would like to emphasize it to the comrades from the Fourth Estate. Most times we seem like to see things as if we operate in a vacuum. But we can't think Uganda, we can't think Kenya alone, we can't think Tanzania alone. We have to think ESC, SADC, COMESA, because there is the tripartite, and we're talking about Africa in general, because the issue of illicit financial flows is an African challenge. The issue of debt is an African problem. And so even if one country flees itself from the debt trap, if all other African countries are indebted, then we are not free until we are all free. I think there's need for that appreciation. And I'm actually trying to buy some time as the printed copy is being delivered here to my colleague. But as also buy time, the panelists are representing the REX, Regional Economic Communities, the ESC and SADC. So they were well thought in terms of the work, the scope of work. Aphrodad is more like an umbrella organization, and Siatini is a member of Aphrodad, just like a number of many of organizations here, CSO representatives, also subscribe to the solidarity, the issues, the quest for prudent debt management in Africa. And when I talk about management, the issues of debt acquisition, utilization, and accountability are all entailed there. We have ZIMCODE. ZIMCODE has also been in this struggle. When I say struggle, I'm not meaning the bush. It's not that other struggle where we want to capture political power. We don't want to usurp anyone's powers. But this is the struggle for economic justice, tax justice, social justice, gender justice, environmental justice, name it. That's the kind of struggle we're into. And we've all seen reports come out revealing the situation in Kenya, the growing apathy in Kenya. But the situation is not only in Kenya, the growing apathy. The situation is in nearly all African countries. And there's need to really dig deep into the root causes of the growing apathy among citizens. If citizens feel the money they pay in terms of taxes is not meeting their needs in terms of social services, then we must do something. We can't ignore it. And as civil society organizations, all that we can do is to advocate and to make things work and to make tax systems work. And for the Tax Justice Alliance of Uganda, I would like to blow a trumpet for the alliance because Siatini is the secretariat for the alliance. What we advocate for is equitable, inclusive, and accountable tax systems in Uganda. But also there is the East African Tax Governance Network. But also there is the Tax Justice Network Africa and the Global Tax Justice Alliance. So we have a number of vehicles that we use to deliver the message and to mobilize citizens. The reason why I'm buying more time is because the copy that was printed is not the copy that I wanted. It's not fully justified. The hotel team didn't do a good job, but can we go with that? Okay, so without taking a lot of your time, I would like to hand over the microphone and the power. The power is all the power. Both to Mr. Chitengo, who is the program coordinator, financing for development thematic area at Siatini. And Siatini is the Southern and Eastern Africa Trade Information and Negotiations Institute. It's a Pan-African research and advocacy organization that strives to promote pro-development trade, fiscal and investment related policies and practices for sustained equitable development and improved livelihoods in Africa. We are going continental, and we'll talk about that. Thank you. Over to you, Aloysius.
Thank you, everyone. As my colleague has highlighted, we have been here for now 2 days, trying to forge a way on how we can address issues of illicit financial flows, issues of debt, but also even looking at the aspect of our extractive sector as something which can give us the revenue we need to reduce on our indebtedness, but also even cater for provision of services. So, as I'm reading the statement, the statement reads a regional press conference, a press statement, and our theme is the urgent action required to tackle illicit financial flows and strengthen debt management for effective domestic resource mobilization in the ESC and SADC. Entebbe, Uganda, 12th December 2024. We are representatives of civil society organization from the East Africa Community, Southern Africa Development Community, SADC, sub-region, working on fiscal justice, extractives, investments, human and environmental rights, debt, climate and gender justice, convened from 10th to 12th December 2024 at a region dialogue on addressing the impact of illicit financial flows and debt on domestic resource mobilization in East African Community and SADC. United under the theme promoting accountability, equitable and inclusive domestic resource mobilization systems in ESC and SADC region, we have formulated actionable strategies and call for action to enhance DRM, domestic resource mobilization efforts, while at the same time address the impact of illicit financial flows and unsustainable debt on the financial integrity and broader governance and development framework of our respective countries. These strategies, rooted in tax justice and prudent debt management, are key to ensure accountable, equitable, and inclusive domestic resource mobilization systems, but also frameworks in the ESC and in the SADC sub-region, or the REX. The dialogue has reaffirmed the critical importance of domestic resource mobilization in achieving sustainable development in both the ESC and SADC. However, without addressing the underlying issues of illicit financial flows and unsustainable debt, the region will continue to face significant obstacles in realizing its sustainable, the sustainable development goals. As you know that we do subscribe to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We observed that while various efforts have been undertaken to curb illicit financial flows and promote prudent debt management, significant gaps persist in the implementation, enforcement, and coordination of these initiatives. The IFFs, or the illicit financial flows, and escalating debt burden threatens the ability of the ESC and SADC regional economic blocks to mobilize resources for social services, drive long-term national development, and fulfill regional commitments on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. These challenges erode economic stability, state sovereignty, and the future development prospects in the ESC and the SADC region. We note that to effectively mitigate the impact of or the impacts of illicit financial flows and unsustainable debt, concerted effort must be made to tackle the underlying causes that drive these challenges. The root causes of illicit financial flows are manifested including the tax evasion, the tax avoidance, money laundering, informal trade, smuggling, abuse of double taxation treaties, and capital flights, among others. These activities have facilitated the outflow of vast sum of much needed resources that could otherwise be used to invest in well-being of citizens, stimulate economic growth, and support critical sectors such as healthcare, education, infrastructure development, and access to clean water in ESC and SADC region. Recent data underscore the significance of revenue losses across the ESC due to IFFs and related activities. For instance, in Tanzania, it is estimated that the country loses approximately 1.4 billion US dollars annually to illicit financial flows. In Kenya, due to multinational corporations' fraudulent practices, the country loses an estimate of 8.3% of the government revenue, equivalent to nearly 10.7 billion US dollars per year, and that is for the year 2020. Similarly, in the case of Uganda, we lose around 700 million US dollars due to IFFs, as indicated, as it was evidenced by the UNCTAD findings 2022, presenting severe challenge to resource mobilization and fiscal stability in the region. In the light of the foregone challenges, we note the following. Illicit financial flows undermine domestic resource mobilization. Illicit financial flows represent a severe drain on resources vital for national development in African region. Estimated from the UNECA report indicating that African countries lose between 50 billion to 80 billion annually to illicit financial flows. Funds that could otherwise support public service and human capital development, as well as driving industrial and productive investment in the region. This financial hegemon is a significant obstacle to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals due to the growing financial gaps that cannot be addressed by the official development assistance or official development aid the region receives annually. The region remains vulnerable to revenue leakages facilitated by the weak regulatory frameworks, inadequate domestic tax policies to address the evolving landscape. For instance, the digital economy, limited technical and human capacity to enforce the international tax practices, compounded by the loopholes in the global tax governance framework that allow multinationals and wealthy individuals to exploit inconsistencies within the domestic tax laws. Another issue which we came up with is the unproductive tax incentives and exemptions. In the bid to attract foreign direct investments, African countries continue to compete among themselves while offering unproductive tax incentives and exemptions that have failed to translate into economic benefits envisioned at the time of awarding these incentives. Studies on tax competition within the ESC region by the Tax Justice Network Africa indicates that these incentives have found to contribute to very large revenue losses for governments and promote harmful tax competition in the region. The recent tax expenditure reports within the region revealed that fiscal impact of these incentives, for instance, in Kenya, in Kenyan shillings, for Kenya, they lost 510.56 billion. That is per the report of 2024. In Uganda, we had to forego 2,972 billion as per the report of 2022-23. Tanzania, they had to forego 3,081.8.31 billion in their report of 2023, because ESC and Uganda in particular, and the ESC member states, we are now producing the tax expenditure reports to account on how much we forego in terms of the revenue, in terms of the tax incentives we award to investors who are coming into the country, or those who are doing investment within the country, to enable them do business at a relatively low prices, but on the trade-offs. And in Rwanda, they had to forego 556.3 billion in their report for 2022-23. These losses undermine the efforts by the ESC member states to achieve the 25 tax to GDP ratio set under the Monetary Union Protocol, limiting their ability to mobilize resources for sustainable development, reflecting weakness in tax administration, and contribute to over-reliance to external financing. The other issue which we came up with in this statement is on the debt trap and its implication on domestic resource mobilization in the ESC and the SADC member states. The rising debt levels in the ESC and Southern Africa are on the growing concern, with significant impact on domestic resource mobilization due to the high debt servicing obligation, taking a significant toll on domestically generated revenue. For example, Uganda's 2024-2025 national budget projections projected a revenue collection of 32 trillion, approximately 8.5 billion US dollars, yet the country's debt servicing requirement stands at 34 trillion, about 8.9 billion. This means that debt repayments are outpacing revenue collection, leaving little to no financial space for investment that drive long-term development in a country. Countries in both the ESC and SADC are increasingly turning to non-traditional creditors at much high rates, high interest rates, further compounding the debt burden to the ESC member states or the citizens in terms of our commitment in terms of our compliance to our debt obligation. This trend is reflected in the rising debt to GDP ratio in several EAC member states and SADC countries. For example, in Zambia's debt to GDP, Zambia's debt to GDP ratio surged to over 130% debt to GDP ratio in 2023, one of the highest in sub-Saharan Africa, highlighting the need for urgent debt restructuring. With official development assistance declining and the borrowing pace becoming constrained, countries face severe limitation in pursuing long-term development strategy. This leaves very limited room for meeting the sustainable development goals and application of innovative public policy solutions to Africa's rapid development needs. The UNCTAD World Investment Report 2024 cushions the growing reliance on private creditors, exacerbating the already challenging debt situation. These creditors often offer more expensive and short-term debt that cannot be directed towards productive investment, which are essential for sustainable development. This shift makes it hard for government to focus on long-term development projects. Another issue is on corruption and lack of transparency in debt management. We came to realize that corruptions remain a significant barrier to effective DRM mobilization in both the regions. Borrowed funds that increase public debt are often mismanaged or deviated to non-productive use, undermining the intended development outcomes. Weak institution frameworks, limited public accountability, and inadequate political goodwill and bureaucratic commitments has exacerbated this situation of corruption and opacity in public debt management. In several countries, debt funds have been misallocated or misused due to lack of robust oversight mechanisms and political goodwill to curb the vice and utilize debt to transform structural economic growth. Furthermore, the lack of transparency in debt management and resource allocation makes it difficult for countries to hold their government accountable. Civil society organizations continue to call for greater public access to debt information, improved budget transparency, and public participation in decision-making process to ensure that resources are used in the way that benefit the world population and not just elite interests. The other issue is on the regional collaboration. We were of the view that we need to strengthen regional collaboration as something which is critical when it comes to issues of debt, IFFs, and revenue mobilization. Recognizing the role of various initiatives to curb IFFs and promote exchange of information on tax matters within the African continent, these efforts have been undermined by lack of robust mechanisms and policy frameworks to facilitate the recovery of tax claims derived from surcharges. This creates a significant gap in collection of revenue and international corporations, undermining the potential gains from enhanced cooperation. Furthermore, we note that while several commitments have been made on regional and sub-regional levels, these are affected by the slow domestication by the member country states and limited political will to support these commitments, which has affected the implementation and execution of such initiatives in the EAC member states, but also even among the RECs. And this has caused the silo mentality of individual countries trying to fight these revenue leakages while frustrated by the slow progress of other countries in the ratification and the implementation of the commitments which we agree upon under the different RECs. The fight against illicit financial flows, the need for financial system reforms, and the changes posed by the unsustainable debt require greater collaboration across borders. Civil society play a critical role in advocating for tax justice, prudent debt management, and reduction of illicit financial flow through regional and international advocacy. However, to achieve greater impact, these efforts must be amplified and coordinated to influence policy decisions at national, regional, and global levels. We, the representatives of civil society participating in this regional dialogue, also recognize the importance of regional cooperation in tackling tax evasion, reducing illicit financial flows, and improving the effectiveness of domestic resource mobilization systems and strategies. Initiatives such as the African Union's Africa Tax Administration Forum, that is ATAF, and Africa Union's 2063 agenda are vital in strengthening regional tax frameworks and enhancing the capacity of governments to protect the resources. We also identified another issue of the weak governance in the extractive and natural resource sector. The EAC is focusing on development and promoting of extractive industry and mineral value chain. This is in recognition that the EAC states are endowed with rich mineral resources, mineral resource potential, ranging from gemstones, precious metal, base metal, and industrial and construction materials, among others. Even though African countries have subscribed to several commitments, for instance, the African Mining Vision, that envision a sector that catalyzes and contributes to the broader based growth and development of and is fully integrated into and a signal of African market through ensuring that the downstream linkages into mineral beneficiary, the downstream linkages or the downstream mineral sector link to the mineral beneficiation and manufacturing. However, several EAC member states are still exporting unprocessed minerals, thus facilitating revenue loss and illicit financial flows. Furthermore, in case of Uganda, a member of the Extractive Transparency Initiative, since August 2020, the country is still challenged in accessing critical information, for instance, production sharing agreement, access to gold exports, production data and critical data necessary for transparency. Limited access to limited access to beneficial owner data or information, among others. This has made the extractive sector contribute less revenue to their national resource envelope, while at the same time facilitating illicit financial flows. The last issue is on we have come to realize that we have an issue of comprehensive and inclusive approach to debt management, which we need to embrace within the ESC member states to ensure that issues of debt are tackled in a fair and a just way. And given the limited, the statement reads that given the limited capacity for DRM or domestic resource mobilization in many East Africa and SADC countries, there is an urgent need to adopt alternative strategies to address the growing debt crisis and demanding illicit financial flows. Debt swaps, debt restructuring, and renegotiation mechanism should be explored to alleviate the burden of unsustainable debt while ensuring that borrowed funds are directed towards long-term productive development, capacity building for relevant state and non-state institutions, and non-state institution broadly convened, and ensure that this go in a way to improve prudent debt management and countering illicit financial flows. Moreover, regional tax harmonization efforts are essential to reduce tax evasion and capital flights. Strengthening tax administration, enforcing multilateral tax arrangements, and creating fair tax environment are critical to mobilizing domestic resources more effectively. Given the above observation and realities, we recommend the following: strengthening regional tax harmonization efforts to reduce tax evasion and promote fair tax practices across the ESC and SADC regions. Second, push for implementation of existing frameworks to curb illicit financial flows, including stricter regulations of international financial transactions and trade flows. Third, improve debt management practices to ensure borrowed funds are directed towards productive, long-term investments and not wasted on servicing debt. Expand access to information and promote public participation in decision-making processes related to budgeting, data acquisition, and resource allocations. Another recommendation is on enhance the capacity of regional CSOs to engage effectively with government and international organizations to influence domestic resource mobilization policies, reduce IFFs, and address unsustainable debt challenges. Another recommendation is to hold annual regional presidential roundtable at the ESC and SADC level and discuss serious policy adaptations and innovations that can address IFFs and debt burden facing the region. Another issue is on undertake broad industrial policy that are intended to claim national and regional level controls over entire value chain for critical, which is now called the green mineral, and other extractives in order to minimize public revenue generation and development benefits from exploration of our natural resources. Another recommendation is on a cost-benefit analysis is needed for the tax expenditures being awarded in the name of attracting investments in the ESC to ensure value for money. Another issue is on that fourth estates needs to be brought on board to undertake investigative journalism related to issues of illicit financial flows. And the last recommendation is on ensure that we do targeted capacity building and sensitization about tax. Targeted capacity building and sensitization about tax is critical, which will require separating tax administration and tax awareness to the extent of creating an independent body. In conclusion, addressing these issues requires a comprehensive and regional coordinated approach, including stronger regulatory frameworks, enhanced enforcement of existing laws, improved transparency, and international cooperation. Only by addressing the root causes of illicit financial flows and promoting sound fiscal management can the region secure the resources needed to drive sustainable development and improved livelihoods of its people. A coordinated effort among civil society government, and international partner is essential to create a more transparent, accountable, and equitable financial system that will enable both regions to mobilize resources effectively and invest the same for the benefit of their population. It is now the time for ESC, for East Africa and Southern Africa to take bold, decisive actions that prioritize equitable revenue mobilization, transparent fiscal systems, and effective governance of natural resources to ensure realization of sustainable and inclusive development for all citizens. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aloysius Chitengo, for reading out loud that press statement. But it would be very important to turn to Kenya first to get some insights from Ms. Irene Otieno, but also for Ms. Irene Otieno to share some insights around the situation in Kenya in terms of tax justice and the growing apathy, because the issues crossed over to Uganda. In fact, citizens were also sort of starting to rise up in arms in protest of how their tax revenue is not matching with the services that are being delivered. So please, could you share insights around that, but also re-echo some of the messages and issues that have been shared?
Thank you very much, colleague from CRTV, for sharing that statement on behalf of the participants that have been here for the last 3 days. So I'll give a bit of insights on what is happening in Kenya. So one has been, Kenyans have been concerned with what our government has stated to be deficits However, when we have unpacked, and I think that is the encouragement we'd want to give all other countries represented here, that we cannot talk about a deficit in a budget without unpacking that budget and understanding, are those budgeted corruption, are those essentials allocation? So for us, that was a critical tool that citizens and the media who are represented here did. And we established that when we look at budget and talk about deficits, you find that a significant part of the budget is going to what we call DSAs, allowances of 13% of state and public officers. A daily allowance as a DSA is equivalent to the wage for a month for a junior secondary teacher. So those are the inequalities that have angered Kenyans, that we talk about deficits, but whoever is pushing this deficit, it's going to unessential areas for only 13%. So we need, as African countries, to look at how our economy is structured. If our economies are majorly informal, and we are talking about improving tax morale, there is no way we will improve tax morale and therefore increase domestic resource mobilization if we do not redistribute the proceeds of that tax to even the people in the informal sector. The second thing we noted in our Kenyan context is the over-reliance on public-private partnerships. So government have said that they do not have enough money, and so they are looking at PPPs. But we have questioned what type of arrangements are we having under PPPs? How much transparency is there, even for the citizens to know that the private investor has already recouped their initial investment, and is it structured in a way that favors Kenyans? And the concern for Kenyan was also not just on the PPPs, but what type of companies are we contracting? So if this company is a company that has been called out for corruption in other jurisdictions, how sure are we that a PPP structure that is opaque will not perpetuate the corruption that has happened in other jurisdictions? So when we talk about information exchange, the information exchange should not be limited to only tax administrators, but even issues around corruption should inform how African governments contract. We cannot be contracting and giving a significant part of our revenue to countries that have been blacklisted. I think in our context, the other encouraging thing has been whistleblowing. I think we have spoken a lot of good things here in terms of recommendation, but the question is, how many people access that information to be able to tell us what government is doing? So the encouragement is that we heavily rely on citizens in spaces where, in their ordinary businesses, what are lawyers or advocates speaking in terms of transactions? What are the auditors seeing? And how can we make them know it's a safe space to come out with this information, and the citizens will rally around it? So I think those are the 2-3 things I wanted to mention, but really in the context of Kenya, to say that the movement has been spearheaded by the youth. And this, for me, aligns with the conversation we are talking about debt. When we are talking about debt, our countries are contracting debts that will be repaid for the next 30 years. So it is the youth that will be paying this debt for the long time. So it's actually a conversation that the youth should lead, because the repayment will come from the youth. Now back to a few of the comments that my colleague has mentioned. When we talk about the extractive sector, I think it's important, and I'd want to echo what he's saying, that the taxing landscape is changing. So there's the digital taxation, there's how we tax extractives, and so the capacity of our tax administrators, and more importantly, the political will of our countries and legislators to push back against the architecture that is being pushed by developed countries is important. And we also, as African countries, need to ask ourselves whether it's also time to put in place what we call the sovereign wealth funds. Because if we are having minerals, critical and green minerals, as has been mentioned, we then therefore need to safeguard and ensure that the resources from the minerals does not go to the routine, recurrent things, but how will the future generations benefit from this? So the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and we can look at the case study of Norway, would be instructive for all of us. Lastly is on the issue of illicit financial flows. We have spoken for a long time as African countries on the illicit financial flow in the African context, and we have quantified it. But for you to make it a conversation that Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda needs to address, then we need to quantify what is the size of the illicit financial flows in Kenya. And we cannot tell our policymakers, Africa is losing this much in illicit financial flows. They might choose to say that is a Ugandan problem or a Rwandan problem. So if we can bring it down to what is the size of illicit financial flows in Kenya, and be able to show them that if you can address illicit financial flows in Kenya, then you do not have to increase the VAT, which has been the big problem in Kenya, that we are leaving the bigger players and we're increasing the VATs where the women, the youth, the families are buying every day in terms of food. So just to say that taxation is not an abstract thing. We have seen it taking away the right to food, because when you increase the VAT, it means people cannot afford food on their table. We have seen the privatization of our health systems. That is what we are pushing back in Kenya, to say that you cannot give so much resources to the private sector and give the health sector to the private sector, but we need to guard jealously the place of public services and not privatize all of our public services in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Irene Otieno, for those insights. I think it's about time to turn to SADC, because we've heard from the ESC, but it would be very interesting to have a Zimbabwe coalition on data and development, and that's none other than Mr. Sibanda, to share some insights, but also to speak to the Zimbabwe situation. Is it different? And how different is it? Thank you.
Thank you so much. For Zimbabwe and the SADC in general, the situation is really the same. Let me give you a good example on taxation. Is like recently on the 28th of November, 2024, the Minister of Finance and Economic Development and Investment Promotion, Honorable Professor Mthuli Ncube, presented this national budget, I think a 274 billion Zimbabwean dollars budget. But if you really analyze that budget, you can see that in terms of the financing part, is linked towards the tax issues and debt issues. So I'll start from the debt issues. The debt issue is that our debt as Zimbabwe is now standing at about 21 billion United States dollars, and is more than 60% of our GDP. If you also do a granular analysis of that debt, you can see that of the 12.7 billion external debt, about 77% of that is actually arrears and penalties. It's not new debt, but there are arrears and penalties which we have accumulated since 2000. We are not honoring our obligations, so we accumulated the arrears over the years. So now for Zimbabwe, we are now struggling to actually access, concessional lines of credit. We cannot borrow. We managed to clear the IMF debt. I think sometime in 2015 when we received the SDRs from the IMF. But we are also now left with the World Bank arrears. We have the AFDB, African Development Bank arrears. We have the European Investment Bank arrears. So, these creditors, they have this principle, what they call the pari passu principle, which means that to access, we don't have debt with IMF, but we can't access credit from IMF because of the pari passu principle, which just says you need to clear all the debts, arrears from the World Bank, arrears from the European Investment Bank, from the African Development Bank, in order for Zimbabwe to access new lines of credit. So you can see that our government's hands are now tied in terms of the fiscal space is now too limited, which is actually now overcrowding public expenditure, particularly on social sectors. The statistics are showing that our government is spending at least 7% of its annual outlays towards debt servicing. So this is too high, or I mean exceeds what we are spending on social protection. You know, we experienced El Nino induced drought in the 2023-2024 agricultural season, and this our agricultural sector in Zimbabwe and the region in general is actually rainfall dependent, and this has greatly affected us as nation and as a region, and there are also now ripple effects from this El Nino induced drought, like food insecurity, and also it goes further into issues to do with electricity. We are now going for more than 20 hours without electricity, and this is the case in Zimbabwe. This is the case in Zambia as well. South Africa, we're struggling with issues to do with energy deficit, and this is actually affecting citizens. So now you see the situation we are having, that the debt situation has collapsed the fiscal space, and now the Treasury or the Ministry of Finance is now over-relying on taxation because we can't actually access, as I indicated earlier, we can't access concessional lines of credit from international financial institutions. So now the ministry or government or Zimbabwe in general is now relying on taxation. Then the 2025 budget, you can see now there are too many sin taxes which are now being introduced. Last year they introduced the sugar taxes, that all sugar on sugar drinks have been taxed, and then the intuition was that the money will be ring-fenced and used toward actually buying cancer machines, dialysis machines to actually help the non-communicable diseases, which I think was good idea. But you can see from the 20 million which was collected in 2023, no cancer machine was actually bought, no dialysis machines, etc. So it becomes a challenge. And this year, they've also added another sin taxes as well on fast foods. If you want to go and buy a burger, you get taxed. Buy shawarma, buy whatever, French fries, they are now being taxed at 0.5%. And this is increasing the burden on the poor, and the poor is the majority. So that's the challenge we are experiencing right now, the debt-linked tax inequalities. Then from the informal sector, our in Zimbabwe and in SADC in general, our economy is actually moving towards informal. For Zimbabwe, our own statistics agents, which is Zimstat, estimate that our economy is now at least 80% informal, which means 20% is only formal. And then now we are seeing, because many people, women, youth, people with disabilities are now trying to eke a living from the informal sector, and then now the government, the treasury is now coming after the informal sector again. That's where we now have experienced, now they're demanding, say, you must have a tax clearance certificate, and you must be VAT registered for you as an informal trader to access, goods and services, to buy goods and services from the formal producers. And this is actually adding a burden on the already overburdened citizens. So, this VAT registration issues to do with the tax clearance certificates, I think it's something which is now really affecting us. And then we have also introduced the 2% tax. From that tax, you say, if you use electronic transactions, you go into a shop, you want to swipe, buying bread or buying sugar, there's 2% tax, you are taxed for using electronic transactions. So you can see that the tax issues are not only from the Eastern Africa, but it's something which is widespread, including in Zimbabwe and Southern Africa. If we are talking about sustainable, tax expenditures, or what you call tax incentives, the situation is the same for Zimbabwe and Southern Africa as well, where the government continues to give their giveaways, where companies are foreign, particularly foreign companies, actually being these tax incentives under the guise of attracting investment. But we are saying, considering that we are facing a very limited fiscal space, how can we afford to actually give away these unsustainable tax incentives? Yet these foreign investors are the ones who are the champions of tax evasion, smuggling, etc. So these are FFs actually driven by these foreign investors, which were also giving tax incentives. So it's a challenge which is affecting us. Corruption, I can go into detail. We are every week, every month, there are so many procurement scandals in media which are being reported. 80 million lost on that, 100 million lost on that, 60 million US dollars lost on that. So we are losing a lot as a region through these tax debt-induced tax injustices. So I think I can end from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Sibanda. But if you could take the microphone back to him, what's your last message to the people out there in Zimbabwe? You could speak in the local language. A call to action.
Yeah, the call for action in my language, which is Shona, I think the chekutizo we tofanwa kubatana tese sema citizens nekuti zviri kuitika oro nyaya issues ema tax is affecting us. So sema citizens tofanwa kuti tibatane tive ne voice one so that we can hold our government accountable, so that also mari yacho iri kuramba ichitaxwa, mataxes ari kuingiriza, mataxes aya pari kuingiriza. So tukuti toda kuona kuti mari yacho yashanda chii. Kana yaita ring fenced for cancer machines, toda kuona ma cancer machines acho achitengwa achiswa muzvipatara, which are hospitals. Also kana taborowa from now there are issues to do with resource based backed loans. Kana tikaborowa ku China, tikaborowa ku India, mari yacho toda kuona kuti yashanda chii. Government ngaive transparent and also accountable. Tichiudza kuti yatenga zvakati payaborowa from country yakati. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sibanda. That's very interesting. Africa is here in this room. And he has unpacked the situation in Zimbabwe. He has confirmed it's the same. But would like to get more insights around what can be done about that situation. From the press statement that was read out by Mr. Aloysius Chitengo, recommendations came out. But I would like now to turn to Mr. John Oduk from the African Forum on Data and Development. There is an issue of promoting prudent debt management. Could you make the case for that? And also if you could share a few additional insights around what the other colleagues are speaking to. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Herbert, and once again, thanks to Siatini for organizing this. And I think specifically focusing on the issue of debt management, I think as outlined in the press statement that Aloysius has just read, I think what has been really outlined is more inclined towards the data accountability. But I think as a way forward, I think there's also need to start making calls for creditor accountability, because this goes both ways. Yeah, and I think just focusing on the issue of debt and why we are in the situation that we currently are in, we must put focus on addressing the underlying systemic issues, because the crisis that we are in is by design. Yeah. So therefore, we have to address the underlying systemic issues that are stemming from the global financial architecture that, if you remember very well, on day one, we gave some insights on how it operates and the power play that there is within the global financial architecture that sideline our developing countries and has some very unfavorable policies that affect the global economic governance. And so these are some of the things that we really need to address But then again, when I want, just still focusing on the issue of debt, and just to give us a moment to pause and reflect on what the situation is at the moment. Once again, I have to emphasize that for every dollar that Africa spends towards debt servicing is a dollar less for development financing. And also, it is interesting that over the past decade, developing countries have seen interest payments increase by approximately 64%. In Africa, interest payments have increased by 132% over the same period. That's over the past 2 decades, at the detriment of spending on education, healthcare, and investment. But why is this important? If you look at the population of our continent, the thing that we really need to pay attention to is the whole aspect of critical minerals. I think the first thing we need to ask ourselves, by the term being coined as critical, we need to ask ourselves, it's critical to who? I think that's one thing that we really need to engage ourselves around, because these minerals are quite vital in what we call, or rather the talks that have been going around on just transition. And just to add on that, right now, as you see, the world is slowly moving towards what is coined as the 4th industrial revolution. And these minerals, they play a critical role in, especially in development, because with the just transition, we are trying to, the world is transitioning to a low carbon economy. So therefore, these minerals are key in the development of the renewable energy technologies. And also just still focusing on the issue of DRM, domestic resource mobilization. We also need to emphasize the issue, or rather the developments around artificial intelligence. On the other hand, they could lead, or rather change the IFF's landscape, because if you look at some of what we have as digital currencies, the likes of cryptocurrencies, these are unregulated currencies. So it's easy to use them for financing illegal activities such as terrorism financing, as well as encouraging money laundering activities. And also on the issues of cryptos, there are things that have emerged to counter it. For instance, the development of central bank digital currencies by our central banks to try and sort of counter the risks that come with the cryptocurrencies. But then I think, as I give maybe just a final call on when we are discussing the whole issues around addressing our resources, addressing DRM issues within our continent. I think one thing that we really need to also focus on is the role that the international financial institutions, the World Bank and IMF, play in terms of influencing policies within our continent, and that specifically is in regards to issues around influencing fiscal consolidation policies that I think we've seen this year in Kenya, how it ended up fueling the protests that we saw. And also one of the issues that we've been talking about during the conference on the role of credit rating agency in terms of how they determine the cost of borrowing for our African countries, and the bias that is there in the ratings that they give. Yeah. So I think as a continent, there's that need for a rallying call to speak in one voice on these issues that are affecting our socioeconomic development, so that when we go out there to negotiate, especially now that we have the presidency of the G20 coming to South Africa, Uganda as the chairship of the non-aligned movement. So there's need to leverage on these spaces to ensure that our representatives from the continent and also the presence of the AU in the G20 to push for African perspectives in decision making, to ensure that in the long run, no matter how small the steps are, at some point our voice, the voice of the continent, will be heard in this critical decision making or policies that govern financing for development in our continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. John Oduk from the African Forum on Debt and Development. He has made the case for prudent debt management, but also alluded to issues of the energy transition, critical minerals, questioning critical to who, and the narrative around that, but also contributed to the way forward and what we need to do, especially in view of emerging issues like the artificial intelligence. Because Africa is more of a consumer of artificial intelligence. We're not innovators. So how can we be equal contributors to that? And he has shared some insights around that. I would like now to invite Ms. Rurit, who is going to share with us insights around the issue of citizens holding duty bearers accountable and governments accountable. And Kenya is in the lead on this because the public was holding those in offices of responsibilities accountable. But also, if you could speak to the issue of young people, the youth bulge. Africa is a young continent. How can governments meet the needs of the young people? But also, if you could wrap up that message in Swahili, you would have done me good. Please don't disappoint me. Thank you.
Tough task. But thank you very much for that question. So I think I just want to begin this context by saying living in Kenya and coming from South Sudan as a country has been able to give a very interesting comparative analysis to civic participation in the conversation around social and economic justice. So if you look at Kenya, for example, there's been a lot of activity around civic participation, and that has heavily been seen with regard to domestic resource mobilization issues, particularly with the Finance Bill of 2024 that came into play and brought out real issues when it comes to taxation and how they directly affect different populations. And at that point, you'll notice that there was that uprise, there was that recognition of the fact that taxation actually directly influences the social, economic, and political landscape within our respective countries. And you'll see very interesting things coming into play as well. The idea of the digital technologies and what they mean for civic participation, what they mean for accountability, and what they mean for conversations and dialogue around prudent debt management, tax justice, and development in itself. Now, I'm going to talk about my points in three key areas. One is the idea of a rights-based approach to conversations around domestic resource mobilization. Fiscal policy in itself should always respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. But if you look at our different countries and how fiscal policy design, how it is communicated, how it is created, and the various interplay between the kind of strategies we are trying to design in order to ensure that we are financing development, you'll notice that at some point there's the neglect of human rights in this entire process. Look at debt servicing, for example. It's stripping a large portion of money that could potentially be invested in critical service delivery areas, which is healthcare, education, social protection, water and sanitation, you name it. Then again, if we look at the idea of economic growth in itself, you'll notice that our priorities are sometimes skewed towards mega infrastructure at the expense of essential service delivery or pursuing rights-based approaches as well. And why so? It's because we tend to focus so much on economic growth as a proceed and actually forget a lot about the role of attaining human rights. Therefore, we need to consistently establish a direct link between domestic resource mobilization strategies and any other kind of process we are getting into to finance development in the concept of rights-based approaches, or rather what we just call the realization of human rights. I want to tie this strongly to the idea of the gender lens, which has also been a part of this conversation a lot of times. And you'll notice that when it comes to fiscal policy issues, populations actually respond to fiscal policies very differently. And if you take a based approach and look at how populations, whether men and women, and look at how they respond to how fiscal policies manifest within our respective jurisdictions, you'll notice that they all respond differently. And that's why there's the call of assessing how austerity measures impact the lived realities of different populations, for example, women particularly, and how it exacerbates their vulnerabilities. Again, the concept of insufficient social spending, which is related to repayment obligations, it further exacerbates challenges that are faced by critical populations, marginalized populations, women and girls within our jurisdictions, looking at people living with disability and all these particular aspects. But also, in this entire ecosystem, look at the Africa Mining Vision, look at other critical documents that are bound to design how various ecosystems respond to people needs and development. They always turn a blind eye to the gender perspective. And so sometimes we're not appropriately inclusive. We may not be as reflective of lived realities of different populations. Look at the AFCFTA, for example. And these are issues that still continue to come up in this discussion. And so as we think about rights-based approaches, we also need to think critically about the gender lens in itself and how it manifests in this discussion. Second item that I want to talk about is meaningful participation of citizen groups and stakeholder groups as well. When looking at citizen groups, we're looking at women, we're looking at youth, we're looking at marginalized communities such as people living with disabilities, and several other categories of citizen groups that are identified within our respective jurisdictions, and it's constantly different in each and every social economic context. Is it inclusive? Is it reflective of their lived realities? Is it open to their engagement? This then informs some of the recommendations that were brought out in the conversation when the press statement was being read. So it means that how we design public participation systems, how we ensure access to information, should always take stock of the idea of meaningful participation of citizen groups. So even as you look at cases such as Kenya, cases such as Rwanda, Uganda, and the different countries that continue to exist, if participation is featured by tokenism, if it's featured by the idea of not pursuing discussions meaningfully and ensuring voices of populations are heard, as well as their views considered in fiscal policy design, and just the idea of domestic resource mobilization and any kind of discussion we've had over the last 2 days, then we become counterproductive in this front. The last point is the idea of advocacy. So one is tailored advocacy strategies really matter. For Kenya has a very democratic space, which meant that demonstrations, the nature of digital participation and consistent conversation across mobilization worked for that particular context. As we keep looking through conversations on advocacy, we have to be reflective of our respective social economic context. If I went to a country like South Sudan, for example, you'll notice that the media landscape is a bit constrained. What then does that mean for our advocacy? If you look at Uganda, for example, you notice a few similar dynamics on both sides. Look at Rwanda, look at Tanzania, look at Burundi, and look at all other African countries that exist. We all have certain different social economic contexts that should consistently inform our advocacy. And that is how advocacy continues to work for us. As long as we tailor these processes, dialogues, and issues to our respective contexts, then we're able to figure out our similarities, our comparative advantages, and processes that would work for us. The last part is just the idea of concepts of advocacy such as storytelling, concepts of advocacy such as leveraging digital media, and looking at all these aspects. It's time to actually become more innovative and creative in how we either simplify messages in these particular issues and how we package information. And we also have to understand the influence of international and regional processes. Colleagues in the panel have talked about the G20. We look at also efforts such as the UN Tax Convention. We look at issues such as the global financial architecture, SDRs, you name it. Each of these particular agendas, issues, and processes actually inform dynamics within our national public finance systems. It's time to establish that link and look at how we can either leverage, amplify for or against these particular issues, and redefine our development priorities. All in all is to think about how much we can play in this particular objective. And it goes without saying that a rights-based approach should not be forgotten in this conversation. Meaningful participation of civil groups should be considered here, and advocacy should be tailored to our respective contexts. Then that defines integration, defines how we champion our cases and everything. Now on to Kiswahili, now that you've tried to challenge me, and Irene, I'm looking at you because I might throw this at you as well. But ni kusema kwamba sisi sote tuko na, what would I say? Obligation, Irene. Sisi sote tuna jukumu kuhakikisha kuwa nchi zetu zinatufanyia kazi. Is that right? And just to think about the role we all play, that is really what I've just said. We all have an obligation to think about how our countries work for us. Whatever level you're at, however the conversation keeps going, sisi sote lazima tukuje pamoja, kuparticipate kwa hizi conversations, na pia kuhold our governments accountable. I have played with that jargon. I have played with that English and Kiswahili
Lazima
problem.
tukuje pamoja.
Pamoja. Yes,
That's
there we
the
go.
last
Lazima
message.
tukuje pamoja. Back
Great.
to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. In fact, what the message that she shared last is also meant to mobilize all of us as citizens to interest ourselves in these issues, because most times we leave these issues to the elite, and the elite are preoccupied with the struggle to survive. And a number of elites in different countries have betrayed the struggle. So we don't want to delve into that, but let's all interest ourselves in these issues. So there's just one last piece of the press conference that we need to do, the Luganda edition, because we are home. We're going to just do it briefly, 5 minutes, and we'll be done. So he's going to summarize, just to summarize, in 5 minutes, because we have some media stations that really are interested in this. 5 minutes, not to really read the entire press statement, but 5 minutes will be enough to summarize this so that it reaches to the ordinary person down there in Uganda. And lastly, I'll leave it up to the comrades from the Fourth Estate to ask any questions. If there is none, then I'll guide accordingly. Thank you.
Olunaku olwaleero tubadde tuli mu kubaganya tubadde okumala ennaku bbiri tubadde tuli mu kubaganya ebirowoozo ku buzibu bwe tusanga naddala mu nsi yaffe n'amawanga agali mu luse lwa East Africa n'abo abali mu maserengeta ga Africa, nga tukubaganya ebirowoozo ku nsonga ezimu ezinyigiriza amawanga gaffe ate era zitwesanga zinyigiriza n'omuntu asembayo wansi nawulya ensonga y'omusolo ogususse ate nga mutono okubanga gutuukiriza ebiruubirirwa by'eggwanga era ekireese eggwanga okubanga divuddeyo okwewola n'okwewola okususse okuleese okuba nti tetusobola nakuba nti tusasula ebbanja lyaffe. Ebbanja lye twewola ddene okusukka sente ze tukuŋŋaanya naddala mu musolo gwaffe, ate nga n'ebintu bye tulaba byantuyambye okuba nga bivaamu ensimbi nga ebyobugagga eby'omu ttaka mu lunyaanyimbe bye bayita minerals, tugenza okwesanga nga n'amateeka agabifuga oba agabikwasisa manafu, nti ekyandiyambyeko okubanga bassa mu nkola, ate tugenza okwesanga nga tuyina okukkiriziganya kwe twatuukako ng'amawanga g'ensi ya Africa, naddala okukkiriziganya okwaliwo mu nteekateeka gye bayita African Mining Vision, ekakasa oba egezaako okuyamba ensi eza Africa newankubadde amawanga mangi agamu teganaba kussa mu nkola amateeka ago oba okussa mu nkola ebyo bye bakkiriziganyizibwako, naye amawanga agamu gagezezaako okussa mu nkola naddala okulaba nti ebintu bino eby'obugagga eby'omu ttaka tebifuluma ggwanga lyaffe oba amawanga gaffe nga tetugasseeko mutindo, naye tugenza okwesanga ng'ebintu bino eby'obugagga eby'omu ttaka bifuluma amawanga gaffe nga tekukatibbwako mutindo wadde, ne kireetera okuba nti kireese okuba nti eggwanga terisobola kukuŋŋaanya ssente zimala kuva mu byabugagga bya mu ttaka ebyo, ate era ne kireeta n'okukusa ebyobugagga eby'omu ttaka ebyo ne bigenda mu nsi ez'ebweru, z'ensi ez'ebweru ne zisigala nga zitufunamu nnyo ate nga ffe tetufunye. So tubadde wano nga tugezaako okubaganya ebirowoozo ku nsonga ng'eyo, era nga tutunuulidde ensonga endala eri ku mabanja gaffe, nti amabanja ge tulidde oba amabanja ge tulya mangi gatuli mu bulago, gasusse oba enjogera emangu kisusse ey'omulamuzi, kubanga bw'ogezaako okwetegereza ssente ze tukuŋŋaanya naddala nga mu nsi yaffe Uganda, ojja okwesanga nti ssente tukuŋŋaanya mu musolo gwaffe twatunuulira buli obuse 32, kyokka nga ate bw'otunuulya ebbanja tulina okusasula mwaka gwe gumu buli obuse 34. Kitegeeza nti tuli mu mabanja wadde ssente ze tukuŋŋaanya tuzikuŋŋaanya tetusobola wadde kuba nti tusasula n'ebbanja lye tuyina. So ne kireetera okubanga nti ebintu ebirina okukolebwa mu ssente ze tujja mu musolo gwaffe tebirabikako. Nti lwaki balina kusasula musolo ate era ogenda okwesanga nga ne ssente endala bazitadde mu ki mu kusasula abalina otuwa obuweereza. So obuweereza ate bwe balina otuwa ne busobola okuba ne kireetera okuba nti tetusobola bufuna kubanga ssente ezissibwamu ntono. Lwaki? Kuba ng'ogezaako okunulira mu ngeri mu lunyanjube bagiyita recurrent expenditure erina ssente nnyingi ate development expenditure erina ssente ntono. Ne kireetera okuba nti ekigendererwa ky'essente ze batujjamu okutuwa obuweereza tekirabikako. So ffe tetuteesa ku nsonga ng'eyo, kwe kulaba nti ensi zaffe bwe kikwatagana ku musolo omusolo ogukuŋŋaanyizibwa, tulina okufuba okulaba nti ekisookera ddala ensi eziri mu luse eza Africa, eza East Africa, nti tugezaawo okussa mu nkola era ebiruubirirwa bye twatuukako ebyokulaba nti omusolo gwe tujja ku bantu kubakola ebyensuubulugana mu nsi zaffe kumpi gwe gumu, okugezaako okulaba nti abantu abajja okusiga ensimbi mu nsi zaffe tebadduka mu nsi ndala kubanga ensi ndala tebajjaako musolo oba bajjako omusolo mutono. So kye tugamba nti ensi zaffe zirina okussa mu nkola mu bwangu okukkaanya ku musolo oguggyibwa ku bintu ebimu ebisuubulibwa okuva mu nsi ez'ebweru oba ku ebyo ebiva mu nsi zaffe, tulabe nti omusolo gwe tubadde tufirwa tugufuna. Ate era ne tugezaako okulaba nti ensi zaffe zigezeeko okussa mu nkola amateeka ge tukkiriziganyizaako okulwanyisa obukenuzi obuli mu ggwanga, era obukenuzi obwo obugezezaako okuyamba obubbi obuli mu kusasula omusolo nti tugenza okwesanga nti omusolo gwe tulina okusasula abantu abamu tebaguwa kubanga bawaayo envujjirizo ne ziremesa okuba nti omusolo oli gw'alina okuba ng'awa taguwaayo. Era ne tulaba nti tulina okussa mu nkola okulaba nti amabanja gano ge twewola gassibwa ku bintu ebyo bye birina okuba nga gakozesebwako ate era ebinaavaamu ssente ezinaasobola okusasula amabanja ge tulidde ate era naffe okuba nga tukulaakulana. Era ne tugezaako okuteesa mu nteesa yaffe wano nti twetaaga tusse mu nkola okukkiriziganya okw'okukwanyisa ensonga ezimu oba gye twandise information oba okumanyisibwa ku bintu ebyo ebibadde bireetera okuba nga tulema okufuna omusolo ogwetaagisa. Ebintu ebyo okukyusa okwewa oba okugabana okumanyisibwa kujja kuyambako ebitongole byaffe ebikwasisa omusolo okuba nga bigoberera omuntu oyo abatasasudde bulungi. Kyokka ate era kijja kutuyambako okulaba nga bannayuganda bamanya nti essente ezissibwa mu kittavu kya Uganda oba mu mbalirira y'omwaka ogwo yenkana bweti, twewoze ssente bwe ziti, tuzeewoze ku muntu ani, tuzeewoze mu nsi ki, era tugenda zizzaayo tutya. So tugenza okulaba nga ekintu ekyo kijja kuba kya nkizo nnyo okussa mu nkola okugabana okumanyisibwa ku nsonga ezimu. Era ne tugenza okwesanga nti ebitongole ebyannakyewa ebitakabana okulaba nga ensonga ezikwatagana ku bwenkanya ku musolo, obwenkanya mu nsaasaanya byetaagisa okuba nga biweebwa okwongera okumanyisibwa tusobole okulaba nti twogera ne gavumenti zaffe nga tumanyi kye twogerako. Era ne tufundikira nga tugamba nti twetaaga obumu nga bannayuganda ne bannaffe abava mu luse lwa East Africa n'ava mu maserengeta ga Africa okulaba nti tulwanyisa obukenuzi, obubbi n'okubulwa ssente nga ziyita mu bubbi obuli mu butawa musolo n'ebintu ebigwa mu kkowe eryo.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aloysius Chitengo, for that Luganda edition of the press conference. And I personally enjoyed this. So a better round of applause to the panelists. And I think they deserve a group photo. So I request that we stand up for a group photo. And we can hold this press statement because we don't want to be as people that were just gossiping. This is information well researched. Please let's stand up and hold that to symbolize that we have matter, data, evidence, and things of that kind. So let's get a bit closer and we'll have this photo. Aloy, I think we get rid of the draft, then we hold those. We can all hold that just to display it. We can all just display right there. Okay, we can even display it. It is okay. And that, just display it upright, yeah? Thank you. Thank you so much.